She was 17 years old, standing in the freezing rain on the side of a county road outside Chicago, and not one person looked back. The black SUV carrying the Vance family disappeared around the bend, taillight swallowed by the storm, and Leora stood there with a soaked overnight bag, a dead phone, and a silver pendant pressed so hard against her chest it left a mark on her skin. They had taken everything: her name, her money, her voice. They thought they had taken her future too. Then the headlights came. If this story already has your heart, stay until the very end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain had been falling since morning, but nobody at Hartwell Estate had thought to offer Leora an umbrella. That said everything. She had been standing near the back of the funeral crowd for 2 hours, pressed against the stone garden wall, hands folded, watching people she didn't know weep for a woman she had barely been allowed to mention. And not once did Dorian Vance or his wife Patricia glance her way. Not once did their daughter, Camille, acknowledge her existence. Leora was 17 years old, and she had learned over 3 years inside that household how to take up exactly 0 space. She had gotten very good at it. Too good, maybe. Because now, standing on the outskirts of a funeral for a woman whose death she still didn't fully understand, she was so invisible that when the family turned toward the waiting cars, they simply forgot she was there. Or they chose to forget. Leora still wasn't sure which one was worse. She watched the convoy of family vehicles pull away from the curved driveway of Hartwell Estate, a property that belonged to some distant relative of Dorian's, a place Leora had never visited before, and would likely never visit again. And she told herself to move, to call out, to raise her hand and say something. She didn't. Her voice had a way of going missing at exactly the wrong moments. It had been doing that since she was 14, since the first night in the Vance house, when she'd tried to tell Patricia about the locked cabinet in the study, and Patricia had looked at her with that particular brand of patience that was really just contempt wearing a blazer, and said, "Leora, we don't go looking for things that aren't ours." She hadn't spoken much after that. Now the last car, the silver one, Camille's car, rounded the bend in the long gravel driveway, and the red glow of its taillights bled into the gray afternoon rain, and then it was gone. The sound of the engine faded. The rain filled in the silence like it had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. Leora stood there. Her overnight bag was already soaked through. She'd packed it herself when no one had helped her. And she'd used a canvas tote that turned out not to be waterproof, which she had not discovered until the sky opened up 40 minutes into the outdoor ceremony. Her change of clothes was ruined. Her phone had died somewhere around the 3rd hour of standing still in the wet cold, when she'd been trying, quietly and without drawing attention, to look up the bus route back to the city. There was no bus route. Hartwell Estate was 23 miles from the nearest train station, and the closest thing to public transportation was a shuttle that ran twice a day and had already made its second run at 2 in the afternoon. It was now almost 5. Leora shifted the strap of her bag onto her other shoulder and looked at the road. It was a 2-lane county road. There were no sidewalks. The gravel shoulder turned to mud almost immediately, and the mud was the particular dark, sucking kind that grabbed at the soles of your shoes and didn't let go easy. The trees on either side were old oaks, and they did almost nothing to stop the rain because it was November and they had no leaves left to stop anything. She started walking. She didn't have a plan. That was the honest truth of it. She had no plan and no phone and no dry clothes and approximately $11 in cash, which she had folded into the small interior pocket of her jacket 3 days ago and forgotten about. $11 felt like a lot when you were reaching for hope, and like nothing at all when you were counting what stood between you and real trouble. She walked for about 8 minutes before she heard the cars. She heard them before she saw them. A low, organized sound, not the random noise of passing traffic, but something more deliberate, more synchronized. She stepped further toward the shoulder out of instinct and looked back over her shoulder and saw headlights cutting through the gray rain in a straight line. Not one set of headlights. Several. A convoy. 4 black SUVs moving at a controlled speed, evenly spaced, the kind of formation that you don't see unless somebody is either very important or very dangerous, or both. They came around the bend slowly, and Leora stepped fully off the road onto the mud shoulder, pressing herself back like she could become part of the tree line, and she watched them slow down. They weren't slowing for the rain, They were slowing for her. The lead vehicle stopped about 10 feet in front of her. The others stopped behind it, one after another, a quiet mechanical patience to the whole thing that made the back of her neck go tight. The rain drummed on the black hoods. Nobody moved for a moment. Then the rear door of the lead SUV opened. The man who stepped out was not what she expected, though she couldn't have said what she'd expected. He was somewhere in his early 40s, lean without being thin, wearing a dark wool coat that was immediately being ruined by the rain, and he didn't appear to care about that at all. He had the kind of face that had been arranged by hard years into something severe. A jaw set too tight, eyes that moved the way a camera moves, always scanning, always cataloging. There was a scar along his left jaw, fine as a thread, white against his skin. He looked at her the way nobody had looked at her in a long time. Not through her, directly at her. "You're standing in the rain," he said. His voice was low and flat and carried no drama. It was just an observation, like he was noting that the road was wet or the trees had no leaves. "I know," Leora said. It was possibly the most useless thing she had ever said in her life, but it was also all she had. He didn't smile. He walked toward her, not fast, not slow, and when he was about 6 feet away, he stopped. His eyes went to her face, then down to her neck. Then he went very still. Leora felt her hand go automatically to the pendant, a reflex she'd had for 3 years. The same way you check for your wallet or your keys, something you do without thinking, because the thing matters even if you can't always explain why. It was silver, small, shaped like a compass rose, with one arm slightly longer than the others. She'd worn it since she was 12. She wore it because it was the last thing her mother had put around her neck before she died. The man's jaw tightened. "Where did you get that?" he said. "It was my mother's." He was quiet for a long moment. The rain hit the road between them, and the sound of it filled everything. One of the other car doors opened slightly behind him, and he made a very small gesture with one hand, almost nothing, just a slight downward motion, and the door closed again. "What's your name?" he said. Not a question, more like he was running a calculation. "Leora." Something shifted in his face. Not much, but something. "Leora Vance?" he said. She almost corrected him. Her last name was Calloway. It had always been Calloway, but the Vances had changed it when they became her foster family, a decision that had been presented to her as an administrative necessity rather than a choice, and she had never had enough fight in her to push back on it in any official way. So technically, on paper, in the documents that had been filed and stamped and approved by people who had never once met her, she was Leora Vance. "Calloway," she said. "Leora Calloway." He looked at her for another long moment, and then he said, "Your mother's name was Elena." It wasn't a question either. Leora's throat closed, not because the name hurt. It always hurt. It was always going to hurt. But because he said it like he knew it. Not like a name he'd read on a document. Like a name that had weight for him personally. Like a name that meant something. "Yes," she managed. "How old are you?" 17. He looked back at the road she'd come from, then at the soaked bag on her shoulder, then at the mud on her shoes. He took in the whole picture with a kind of professional efficiency that was oddly less offensive than pity would have been. He wasn't feeling sorry for her. He was assessing. "Who brought you out here?" he said. "The Vance family, my foster family." "And they left." "Yes, deliberately." She didn't answer that because the answer was obvious, and she didn't want to say it out loud. He turned and walked back toward the SUV and opened the rear door and held it. "Get in," he said. Leora didn't move. "I don't know you," she said. "No." "You could be anyone." "I could be." "That's not—" She stopped. She tried to organize her thoughts, which was difficult because the cold had gotten into her hands about 30 minutes ago, and it was getting harder to hold on to anything, including sentences. "That's not reassuring." "I know," he said, and there was something in his voice that sounded almost like he was allowing for the point. "But you're standing in the rain on a road with no shoulder, it's 41 degrees, and you've got nowhere to go. So you can get in, or I can call you a car. Your choice." "Why would you call me a car?" "Because your mother kept me alive once, and I owe her a debt that I've never been able to pay." He said it without drama, without softness, like it was just a fact that needed to be stated. "Get in, Leora." She got in. Later, much later, when she had the distance and the safety to think about it clearly, she would understand that getting into that car was the most dangerous thing she had ever done, and also possibly the thing that saved her life. At 17, standing in 41-degree rain with $11 and a dead phone, she didn't have the luxury of waiting for certainty. She had the choice between a known bad situation and an unknown one, and she made the calculation that unknown was worth the risk. The inside of the SUV was warm, immediately, aggressively warm. There was a leather seat and the smell of coffee and something woodsy that she couldn't identify. She sat with her wet bag in her lap and water running off her jacket onto the upholstery, and she was too cold and too exhausted to apologize for any of it. The man got in after her and pulled the door shut. "Callan," he said without looking at her, already looking at his phone. "What?" "My name. You wanted to know." She absorbed this. "Callan what?" A very slight pause. "Rourke." The name meant nothing to her then. She would learn what it meant later, in stages, each stage slightly more alarming than the last. For now it was just a name, and she filed it away the way she filed away everything, carefully, quietly, in a place she could access when she needed it. The convoy started moving. She watched the rain through the tinted window and tried to slow her breathing, which was still doing that shallow, locked-up thing it did when she was scared or overwhelmed, or both. The road moved past. The trees moved past. Nobody in the car spoke to her. Callan was on his phone, speaking in low tones to someone, nothing she could make out clearly. Two other men sat in the front, a driver and someone in the passenger seat who had not turned around once. Leora pressed her back against the seat and looked at her hands in her lap. She thought about the funeral. She had not been invited to the funeral, not really. She had been told she was expected to attend, which was different. Dorian Vance had informed her 5 days ago, in the kitchen of their Evanston home, that they would be attending a private service for a distant associate of the family, and that Leora's presence was required. He had said required the way he said a lot of things, with a flatness that foreclosed argument. Patricia had handed her a black dress that didn't quite fit and told her to make sure her hair was presentable. The deceased was a man named Gerald Hartwell. Leora had no idea who Gerald Hartwell was. When she'd asked, very carefully, in the way she'd learned to ask things, oblique, gentle, leaving the Vances an easy out, Patricia had said simply that he was a business associate and that it was not Leora's concern. It had taken Leora about 20 minutes at the actual service to understand that she had not been brought to mourn Gerald Hartwell. She had been brought because the estate was being inventoried, because certain documents were being reviewed, because Dorian Vance had a specific interest in what Gerald Hartwell had left behind, and Dorian had wanted Leora present in some capacity she still didn't fully understand. Visible, maybe, or accessible, like a tool he might need to reach for quickly. When the tool turned out not to be needed, he'd left it on the side of the road. That was her. That was who she was to them. She had understood that for a while. She just hadn't had it confirmed quite this brutally before. The car turned onto a highway and the speed increased and the rain was still hammering the windows, and Leora closed her eyes and let herself be warm for a moment. Just warm. Just that. She could figure out the rest later. She didn't sleep, but she went somewhere close to it. That gray, half-conscious place where your body starts trying to recover what the last several hours have taken from it. When she came back to full awareness, the car was slowing and the rain was still falling, but the landscape outside had changed. They were in the city. She could see buildings, streetlights, the particular compressed chaos of downtown Chicago at night reflecting off wet pavement. They pulled into the drive of a hotel that Leora recognized not by name, but by the way it looked. The kind of hotel that doesn't have to announce itself because the building itself does the announcing. Dark stone, warm interior light, a doorman under a black awning who moved toward the car before it fully stopped. "This is the hotel," she said. "Yes. She stopped. "I don't have a room." "I know. You'll be in the suite." She turned to look at him. He was already putting his phone away, already half turned toward the door, moving at that same controlled pace he seemed to do everything. She studied the side of his face, the scar, the set of his jaw, the way he carried the weight of his own authority like it was just furniture he'd stopped noticing. You're sweet, she said. Yes, that's... She searched for the right word and landed on the honest one. That's a problem. He looked at her then, fully, and there was something in his expression that might have been the beginning of respect, just the edge of it. The suite has 3 bedrooms, he said. 2 members of my team will be in the other rooms. You'll have a locked door and the means to call for help if you need it, and I will not enter your room without your permission. If that's still a problem, I'll arrange a separate room on a different floor with a guard outside the door. He paused. Your choice. She thought about it for exactly as long as it took for a gust of wind to drive a sheet of rain against the car window. The suite is fine, she said. The hotel lobby was the kind of place that made Leora aware of her wet shoes immediately. White marble floors, warm amber light. A front desk staffed by 2 people who saw Callan and straightened almost imperceptibly, the kind of deference that wasn't trained into you but learned through repetition. Nobody looked at Leora's soaked jacket or her ruined bag. Nobody looked at anything they weren't supposed to look at. They went up in a private elevator. Leora stood against the back wall with her bag and watched the numbers climb and thought about her mother. Elena Calloway had died 4 years ago when Leora was 13. Officially, it was ruled a cardiac event, a heart abnormality that had supposedly gone undetected. Leora had been told this by a social worker who had the delivery of someone reading from a script they didn't write and didn't believe. She had asked questions. She had been redirected. She had been placed with the Vances 8 months later, and the questions had slowly stopped having anywhere to go. She had never stopped having the questions. She'd just stopped asking them out loud. The elevator opened into a small private hallway and then into the suite. And the suite was, she didn't have a better word for it, enormous. Not flashy, not aggressively luxurious, but the kind of large and quiet and carefully appointed that communicated a specific kind of power. Dark wood furniture, good light. A wall of windows looking out over the rain-wet city that stretched for what felt like miles. One of the men from the car, not the driver, the other one, a broad-shouldered man with close-cropped gray hair and the general demeanor of someone who had been paid to notice things, materialized from a side hallway and looked at Callan and then at Leora. This is Marcus, Callan said. He's been with me 18 years. He won't bother you. Marcus gave Leora a single, measured nod and disappeared again. Your room is at the end of the hall, Callan said. There are dry clothes in the closet, basics, various sizes. Take what fits. There's a phone on the bedside table, hotel line, fully operational. You can order food, you can call the front desk. He stopped. Then, you can also call the police. I won't stop you. Leora looked at him. Why are you telling me that? Because I want you to know it's an option. Most people who don't want you to call the police don't mention the police. I'm not most people. She held his gaze for a moment. He didn't look away and neither did she, and that small act of not looking away felt significant in a way she couldn't immediately name. What do you want from me? She said. The question came out more directly than she'd intended, but she was wet and cold and exhausted, and the manners she'd been trained into by 3 years in the Vance house were thinner than usual tonight. Callan didn't seem offended. He moved to one of the chairs near the windows and sat down, and for the first time that evening he looked, not tired exactly, but carrying something. Like whatever he was about to say had been sitting somewhere for a long time and hadn't gotten any lighter in the waiting. Nothing tonight, he said. Tonight you eat, and you sleep, and you get warm. In the morning, when you've had some rest, I'd like to talk to you about your mother. Leora's breath went tight. What about her? Not tonight. You brought it up. I know, and we'll have the conversation, just not tonight. His voice was careful, not dismissive. You've had a hard enough day. She wanted to push. She had questions that had been living in her chest for 4 years, and this man, whoever he was, clearly had some of the answers. But she was also 17, and the adrenaline that had been holding her together since the moment the silver taillight disappeared into the rain was starting to metabolize into something heavier, and she knew with a bone-deep clarity that if she pushed right now, she would either fall apart or make a mistake. Neither was useful. Fine, she said. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, he agreed. She took her bag down the hallway to the room at the end. It was a real room, Chie. Not a hotel room in the generic sense, but a room with a bed with actual weight to it and curtains and a bathroom with a door that locked from the inside, which was the first thing she checked. She locked it. She leaned against the door for a moment in the dark. Then she turned the light on and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked like what she was, a 17-year-old who had been standing in the rain for too long, with hair plastered to her face and mascara she'd applied badly 3 days ago still somehow present in smudged half-moons under her eyes. She looked small. She'd always thought she looked small, not just in height, but in the whole presentation of herself. Something in the posture, something in the set of the shoulders that said, I know I don't take up much space, and I'm sorry for even this much. She looked at the pendant. The compass rose with one arm longer than the others. She hadn't taken it off in 5 years. She hadn't let anyone touch it in that time either, which had caused a minor conflict with Patricia Vance at a family photo session 18 months ago, that Leora still thought about sometimes as the one occasion where she'd held a line. Callan Rourke had recognized it. He had looked at it the way you look at something you've seen before, and his entire body had changed in that moment, subtle, barely visible, but she'd seen it. She was good at seeing things like that. Years of living in a house where moods were weapons had made her very good at reading the half-second shifts in other people's faces. He knew the pendant, which meant he had known her mother. Not just known of her. Known her. Leora sat on the edge of the bed and pulled off her wet shoes and thought about that. Elena Calloway had been careful. Leora understood this now, in retrospect, in a way she hadn't understood it as a child. Her mother had been a careful, private woman who had loved her daughter fiercely and said very little about her work and kept her personal life in separate, sealed compartments. Leora had grown up understanding that there were parts of her mother's world she was not invited into, and she had accepted this the way children accept the rules of their parents, as simply the weather, unchangeable, and not particularly requiring explanation. But now she was 17 and her mother had been dead for 4 years, and a man who drove in black car convoys and had a scar on his jaw and was apparently feared enough that hotel staff adjusted their posture when he walked in had recognized her mother's pendant in the rain outside a dead man's estate. There was a story here. Leora had known there was a story for a long time. She just hadn't known how to find it. She hadn't had anywhere to stand. Maybe now she did. She opened the closet and found the clothes Callan had mentioned. A careful selection of basics, jeans and sweaters and plain t-shirts, several sizes represented without comment, a small basket of toiletries. She stood looking at them for a moment with the complicated feeling of someone who has been thought about by a stranger. It was considerate. It was also deliberate. She wasn't sure yet where the line between those two things was. She took a sweater in her size and a pair of jeans and went into the bathroom and stood under hot water for a long time. The heat came back into her fingers in stages, painfully, the way circulation always returns when you've pushed it too far. She let the water run until the shaking stopped. She thought about Dorian Vance. She thought about his voice at the estate, that particular tone he used in professional settings, smooth and precise and warm in a way that had never once extended to her. She thought about the way he'd spoken to the estate lawyers that afternoon, the careful, controlled language of a man managing something, navigating something, keeping several things in motion simultaneously. She thought about what Patricia had said once, in passing, about the waterfront property. That's a delicate matter, Leora, not your concern. And how she'd filed that away too, the way she filed everything, in the place she kept things she didn't yet understand but expected to need. She thought about Gerald Hartwell. She thought about why Dorian had needed her there. Present, physically present. What use was she, to him, in that context? She didn't have the answer yet, but the question had a shape now that it hadn't had before. She dried off and got dressed and went back to the bedroom and sat on the bed and picked up the hotel phone and ordered food because Callan had said she could, and she was hungry, in the hollow, bone-deep way you get when you've been running on adrenaline for hours and it's finally given out. She ordered soup and bread and coffee, and when it came, 20 minutes later, delivered by a room service attendant who knocked and left the tray without comment, she sat on the bed and ate every bit of it. Then she lay down. She expected not to sleep. She expected to lie there running through everything. The convoy, the rain, Callan's face when he looked at the pendant, her mother's name in his voice, and be awake until dawn. But the bed was warm and the food was inside her, and the door was locked, and for the first time in a very long time she was not in the Vance house. And apparently that was enough, because she was asleep within 15 minutes. She woke up at 6:30 to light pushing through the curtains and the sound of rain still falling and a knock on the door. She sat up. Yes? Coffee's out here when you're ready. Callan's voice flat and neutral through the door. No rush. She sat with that for a moment. She listened for the sound of footsteps moving away and heard them. She got up and went to the bathroom and looked at herself again. Better. Not good. She looked like someone who'd slept hard after a hard day, which is exactly what she was. But better. She went out into the main room. Callan was at the table near the windows with a coffee and what appeared to be documents that he put face down when she came in. Not before she saw that they were dense with text and had several things highlighted. She stored this. There was a second coffee waiting. She sat across from him and wrapped her hands around the mug and looked out at the rain and the city and waited. How much did your mother tell you about her work? He said. Almost nothing. Do you know what she did? She said she was a financial consultant. I never really understood what that meant. It's a broad term. In her case, it covered work that was, he paused, finding the word, sensitive. She worked with people who needed certain kinds of financial analysis done without it appearing in standard records. People with assets they needed to understand and protect without drawing attention. Leora looked at him. That sounds like it could mean a lot of different things. It could. In Elena's case, it mostly meant she was very good at following money through places it wasn't supposed to go, finding it, documenting it, presenting it. He wrapped both hands around his own mug. She worked for me, for a period, about 6 years, before you were born through until you were around 9 or 10. Leora absorbed this. She tried to remember her mother at 9, at 10. The small house in Oak Park. The precise, careful way Elena had moved through their life. Not poor, but not careless. Money managed with a seriousness that a child registers without understanding. The late nights, the locked study. The phone calls that stopped when Leora came into the room. She quit? Leora said. She told me she needed to step back. She was worried about exposure, but about you. Something in his face shifted. I should have pushed harder to keep her protected. I didn't. I thought she'd be safer out of my orbit. He stopped. I was wrong about that. Leora's hands tightened on the mug. You think her death wasn't an accident? She said. It came out steady. She was surprised by how steady it came out, but she'd been carrying this suspicion for 4 years, and it had compacted inside her into something very dense and very hard, and saying it out loud was less like detonating it and more like finally naming it correctly. Callan looked at her for a long moment. I don't think it was an accident, he said. The rain fell outside. Leora sat with the words. Tell me, she said. Your mother had been keeping records. This was after she left my operation. This was on her own, independently. She had found something involving financial fraud on a significant scale, tied to several people in the city who were very motivated to keep it quiet. He paused. One of those people was Dorian Vance. The city lights blurred slightly in the rain-wet glass, and Leora looked at them and thought about Dorian Vance's smooth, careful voice and the way he had placed her in the back seat of the convoy that morning like an object he intended to return to a shelf, and then had not returned her. She had evidence, Leora said. She was building it. She didn't complete it before... He stopped. Before she died. What happened to what she had? I don't know. I've been looking for it for 4 years. His eyes came to the pendant. I think she may have made sure you could find it, if you knew where to look. I think the pendant might be part of that. Leora reached up and touched the compass rose, the arm that was slightly longer than the others. She had always assumed it was a manufacturing imperfection. She had not assumed it was a direction. She looked up at Callan. Why was I at the estate yesterday? She said. Dorian needed me there for something. I could feel it, but I don't know what. Callan's jaw tightened. Gerald Hartwell had been holding certain documents in trust, documents Elena gave him before she died, through a back channel. When Hartwell died, Control of those documents passed, under specific conditions, to the next surviving Calloway. He let that land. Which is you. Leora went very still. Dorian didn't know the conditions required your presence, Callan said. He thought bringing you along as a dependent would be enough. When the estate lawyer reviewed the trust language and indicated that you personally would need to... Stopped. He panicked. He left. He took you with him and then discarded you when he realized what the trust contained. What does it contain? Callan looked at her steadily. Enough to destroy him, he said, and several people around him, including people who have never once thought they were in any danger. Outside, the rain was intensifying again, drumming against the windows with an insistence that felt almost personal. Leora looked at the pendant in her hand. The compass rose, the arm pointing somewhere. She thought about her mother, careful Elena, precise Elena, the woman who had managed money through places it wasn't supposed to go and had spent the last years of her life building a case that was going to cost her everything. She thought about the $11 in her jacket pocket. She thought about Camille Vance wearing lip gloss at a funeral, not looking at her. She thought about Patricia Vance's particular brand of contempt. She thought about Dorian's smooth voice instructing her to be presentable, be quiet, be useful. She thought about the taillights disappearing into the rain. "What do you need from me?" she said. Callan set his coffee down. "I need you to trust me enough to let me help you access what your mother left behind. I need you to be willing, when the time comes, to stand up and say what you know." He paused. "I need you to understand that when this moves, it will move fast, and it will be dangerous, and I cannot promise you it won't be frightening." "I'm already frightened," she said. "I know." "That's not—" She stopped, breathed. "That's not the same as not being able to do it." Something moved through his face. The edge of something. She still couldn't read him well enough to name it. "No," he said. "It's not the same at all." She looked down at the pendant one more time. Then she looked back up. "Tell me what my mother found," she said. And outside, the rain fell on the city like it intended to stay forever, and Callan Rourke began to talk. But before he could finish, before the full weight of what Elena Calloway had discovered could be laid out in the pale morning light, the phone in Callan's jacket buzzed once, sharp and insistent, and he looked at the screen and something closed in his face like a shutter dropping. "What is it?" Leora said. He stood. "Dorian Vance filed a report this morning," he said, his voice gone flat and careful again. "He told the police his foster daughter has been abducted." Leora stared at him. "He told them you're missing," Callan said, "and he gave them my name." Leora didn't move right away. She sat with the coffee mug still in her hands and let the words settle the way cold water settles. Slowly, covering everything. Dorian Vance had filed a missing persons report. He had given the police Callan's name, which meant that somewhere in this city, right now, there were people being set into motion who believed that the man across from her was a kidnapper and that she was a victim. The perverse thing was that 24 hours ago, standing in the rain on a county road with $11 and a dead phone, she might have been willing to call herself a victim. Not anymore. Something had shifted in the night, in the warmth and the food and the locked door, and what had shifted was the particular quality of her fear. It was still there. It wasn't going anywhere, but it had changed shape, from the loose, formless dread of someone with nowhere to go into something more focused, more directional. Like a compass, she thought, and touched the pendant without meaning to. "How much time do we have?" she said. Callan was already moving, not frantically. He didn't appear to do anything frantically, but with a deliberate efficiency that compressed every action into its minimum necessary components. He was on the phone before she finished the question, speaking in low tones to someone she couldn't identify, moving toward the hallway where Marcus had disappeared the previous night. "Enough," he said, not to her, then into the phone. "We need to accelerate the timeline. Yes, all of it." A pause. "I don't care what Henley thinks. Make it happen." Marcus appeared from the hallway like he'd been waiting just inside it, which he probably had. He looked at Callan, and Callan made a small gesture toward the door, and Marcus nodded and left without a word. Leora set her mug down. "You're not going to answer my question," she said. "I'm going to give you a better answer than a guess. Callan pocketed his phone and looked at her with that direct, assessing quality she was starting to recognize as his version of attention. The report was filed at 5:47 this morning. That's less than an hour ago. At this point, it's paperwork. It takes time to become an operational response. How much time? Depends on who Dorian called first. If it was just the police, hours, maybe more. If he called someone with more reach, he stopped. Less. Who does he know with that kind of reach? That's the question we need to answer before they get here. She stood up. The movement felt necessary, like standing was the only appropriate physical response to the situation. I should go, she said. If I walk out of here on my own, the whole kidnapping story falls apart. I can call... She stopped because she was about to say, I can call the Vances, and her brain caught that before her mouth did, because calling the Vances was not an option in any world she intended to inhabit. You can go, Callan said. I'll arrange a car. But I want you to understand what happens if you leave before we've established the full picture of what your mother left behind. What happens? You become 17 again. A minor with no money, no documentation you control, and a foster family that has legal authority over you until you're 18. He said it without cruelty, like a doctor listing symptoms. They put you back in the house. They file additional paperwork about your instability. And I promise you that paperwork already exists, Leora. It's already been prepared. It's sitting in a file somewhere waiting to be submitted. Then the waterfront property goes back into limbo, the documents your mother hid disappear, and the thing she spent her last years trying to finish dies with her, permanently. Leora stood in the middle of the hotel room with the rain outside and looked at the carpet. She was breathing too fast. She could hear herself doing it, and she couldn't immediately stop it. You're telling me I don't have a choice, she said. I'm telling you your choices have different costs. That's not the same thing. It feels the same. I know. He picked up his jacket from the chair where he'd draped it. For what it's worth, I didn't plan this. I've been looking for you for 2 years. I didn't know where Dorian had put you. I found out 3 days ago, and I was already moving toward this when your family handed me the opportunity by bringing you to that estate. She looked up at him. You were at the estate for me? I was at the estate for what Hartwell left behind. You were a discovery I wasn't prepared for. You said my mother kept you alive once. Yes. Tell me how. He put his jacket on. He looked at her for a moment like he was deciding something, and then apparently decided it. 7 years ago, I walked into a situation that had been arranged to end badly for me. I didn't know that going in. Your mother did. She'd found the financial thread that showed me the shape of the setup. She called me 40 minutes before I would have walked into it. He paused. She didn't have to do that. We hadn't spoken in 2 years at that point. She'd already left my operation, already stepped back, was trying to build a clean life. Calling me that day put her back on a map she'd been trying to get off of. But she called anyway. She called anyway. Leora thought about her mother, the careful woman, the precise woman, the woman who had managed their small life in Oak Park with a seriousness that a child understood as love without being able to name it. She was stubborn, Leora said, and it came out rougher than she expected. She was, Callan said, and his voice had something in it that she recognized because she'd felt it herself, the particular weight of someone you're grieving that you haven't been allowed to grieve properly. The door of the suite opened and Marcus came back in. He looked at Callan and shook his head slightly. Callan's jaw went tight. How close? 20 minutes, maybe less. Who sent them? Not the department, private. Marcus glanced at Leora with the flat, unreadable look of someone filing her presence away. Vance has security contractors. Of course he does. Callan moved toward the second hallway, the one Leora hadn't been down. We're moving. Leora? He stopped and turned. You're coming with us or you're going out the front on your own. Choose now. She had $11 in her jacket pocket. I'm coming, she said. They went through the second hallway, which opened into a service corridor that smelled like industrial cleaning products and laundry. There were 2 more men there that Leora hadn't seen before, younger than Marcus, identical in their quality of stillness. Nobody introduced anyone. They moved fast through the corridor to a service elevator that went down without stopping and opened into a parking structure. The second car in the convoy was waiting. Different vehicle than last night, darker, lower. The plates Leora didn't recognize as any state she knew immediately. She got in. They were moving before the door was fully closed. She sat with her hands in her lap and watched the parking structure give way to a ramp, and then to street level, and then to the city, which was gray and wet and fully awake now despite the rain, people with umbrellas moving along sidewalks, coffee shops with fogged windows. A bus going past with an advertisement on its side for something she didn't catch. The normal world doing its normal thing, while she rode in a black car away from a hotel that was probably, right now, receiving visitors she would not have wanted to meet. "Where are we going?" she said. "Safe house on the north side," Callan said. "We'll be there in 20 minutes. And then?" "And then I finished what I was trying to tell you before we got interrupted." Marcus, in the front passenger seat, was on his phone. She could hear fragments. Confirmed, south entrance, no. Tell him to hold. And she watched the city move past and thought about the waterfront property. Her mother had given documents to Gerald Hartwell. Those documents had sat in trust for 4 years, waiting for a surviving Calloway to claim them. When Hartwell died, Dorian Vance had found out somehow. Found out what was in trust and what the conditions were, and had brought Leora to the estate not to mourn, but to be positioned, available, under his control when the lawyers needed to see her. He hadn't expected the trust conditions to require Leora's independent action. He'd expected to be able to manage her the way he always managed her, through proximity, through authority, through the specific pressure of making someone feel so small and so uncertain that they defer automatically. He'd underestimated her. Or rather, he'd underestimated what 4 years of his particular household could produce. Because it had produced something, just not the compliant instrument he'd intended. It had produced a girl who had spent 3 years watching and filing and waiting and was now sitting in the back of a black car, trying to understand the shape of the thing that had killed her mother. She turned the pendant over in her fingers. The arm that was longer, pointing somewhere. "The pendant?" she said. Callan looked at her. "You said you thought it was part of how my mother made sure I could find what she left behind. What does that mean specifically?" "The compass rose design is a known reference point. Your mother used it as a key element in a location cipher she designed, a way of encoding a physical location into an object or an image that someone with the right context could decode." He paused. "The slight asymmetry in the arm length is not decorative." Leora looked down at it. The silver arm, slightly longer, pointing. She oriented it in her hand, north-northwest. "She gave me a map," Leora said. "Part of one." "What's the other part?" "That's what we need to work out." The car turned north, and the rain intensified for a moment, and then eased slightly, the way Chicago rain does when it's deciding whether to commit. Leora held the pendant and thought about her mother sitting somewhere, a kitchen table, a study, a car, wherever, and working out how to hide something important in a piece of jewelry that she would put around her daughter's neck. The calculation of that, the grief of it, the love of it. She pressed her knuckles against her mouth for a moment and looked out the window and didn't say anything. The safe house was not what she'd expected, which she realized was because she'd been expecting something cinematic, something stripped and functional, a place that looked like it existed for exactly the purpose it served. Instead, it was a townhouse in a quiet north side neighborhood, the kind of block with mature trees and clean stoops, and the general atmosphere of people who valued their privacy and extended that value to their neighbors. The car pulled into a narrow alley behind the row of townhouses, and they went in through a back door into a kitchen. The kitchen had a coffee maker and a table and 4 chairs and a bowl of fruit on the counter that had been there long enough that the bananas were going dark at the ends. It smelled like the particular mix of cleanliness and disuse that a space develops when it's maintained but not lived in. A woman was waiting at the table. She was perhaps 35, with short dark hair, and the kind of face that was precise without being pretty. Strong lines, watchful eyes, a mouth that looked like it didn't waste much time on smiling. She was dressed practically. She had a laptop open in front of her and a coffee she wasn't drinking. She looked at Leora with an intensity that was clinical rather than hostile. "This is the girl?" she said to Callan. "This is Leora Calloway," Callan said, and there was a small correction in his voice that Leora noticed. Not aggressive, just exact. "I'm Dara," the woman said to Leora directly. "I've been pulling everything I can find on the Hartwell Estate Trust for the last 14 hours. Sit down." Leora sat down. Dara turned the laptop toward her. On the screen was a document, dense, formatted in legal language, the kind of thing that could be a rental agreement or a will or a small country's tax code for all the care it took with accessible language. The trust, Dara said, was structured by Hartwell himself with a private attorney who died in 2021. The terms are unusual. The contents are not inventoried in the public record, only that a trust exists, that its beneficiary is the surviving issue of Elena Calloway, and that access requires the beneficiary's direct, in-person, voluntary claim. She tapped the screen. Voluntary. That word was specific and deliberate. No proxy, no guardian, no acting on behalf of. "Dorian can't claim it for me," Leora said. "Dorian cannot claim it, cannot authorize someone else to claim it, and cannot legally compel you to claim it in any particular way." Dara leaned back. "What he can do is establish you as legally incapacitated, which would trigger a different set of provisions. That's why the paperwork Callan mentioned exists. He's had a psychiatric evaluation prepared, third party, backdated through some creative documentation, that describes you as delusional, a danger to yourself, unsuitable to make independent legal decisions." The air in the kitchen felt thinner suddenly. "He's had that prepared," Leora said. Not a question. "For approximately 6 months, Dara said. He was waiting for the right moment. He didn't expect Hartwell to die when he did. Hartwell's death accelerated his timeline. He wasn't ready. But he's ready now." Dara looked at Callan. Callan looked back at her. Something passed between them that Leora couldn't read. "Tell her," Leora said. Callan pulled out the chair across from Leora and sat down. He put both hands flat on the table, which she was beginning to understand was his version of bracing for something. "Dorian has a judge," he said. Leora stared at him. "A family court judge who has been on his payroll for 3 years. The paperwork Dara described, the psychiatric evaluation, has already been submitted to that judge's court. The hearing was scheduled this morning, provisionally, in your absence, pending service of notice." He held her gaze. "Legally, right now there is a proceeding in motion that would declare you a ward of the state under Dorian Vance's continued guardianship until you turn 18, which is 7 months, Leora said. Her voice was flat and strange in her own ears. 7 months, he confirmed. In 7 months, you're legally an adult and none of this matters. But until then, if he gets that order enforced, he controls your legal standing. He can claim the trust on the grounds that you are legally incapable of doing so independently." Leora looked at the table. She looked at the grain of the wood, the small dark knot near the edge, the coffee ring from Dara's mug. "He planned this for 6 months, she said. At least. And my mother planned the trust to prevent exactly this. Elena knew what Dorian was capable of. She built in every protection she could. Callan's voice was even, but there was something underneath it. She couldn't protect against a corrupt judge. She couldn't have anticipated every vector. She trusted Hartwell to hold it safely. And he did. For 4 years. Something in Callan's face went hard. Gerald Hartwell was a decent man. His death was sudden. Leora looked up at him. His death was sudden, she repeated slowly. Callan said nothing. Was it? She said. Another silence. Dara had gone very still at the other side of the table, watching her laptop screen like it was doing something interesting, which it wasn't. We don't have proof of that, Callan said carefully, but you think it. I think Dorian Vance has a history of beneficial timing, he said, and I think Gerald Hartwell knew something about your mother's death that he took with him. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the rain was tapping at the window above the sink with a small, insistent rhythm. Leora thought about Gerald Hartwell, whom she had never met, a man she'd stood near at his own funeral without knowing who he was, a man who had apparently been holding 4 years' worth of her mother's work in trust, quietly, at personal risk, and who had died suddenly and conveniently in the month that his estate would come under review. She thought about Dorian Vance's voice at the estate, the smooth control of it, the management. She thought about being 14 and trying to explain something to Patricia Vance and being told, gently and precisely, that she didn't understand how the world worked, and that it was not her concern. She felt something in her chest that was not fear. It was adjacent to fear. It lived in the same neighborhood, but it moved differently. It had direction. "What do we do?" she said. Dara spoke before Callan could. "We need to get to the waterfront property before Dorian does. The documents your mother left with Hartwell, those are in the trust, which we can't access without you claiming it formally. But there's a second set. A backup your mother kept independently, at the property itself." She looked at Leora. "Elena owned the waterfront property under a different name. Dorian has been trying to get legal control of it for 2 years through probate. So far, he hasn't been able to because the title is buried under 3 layers of holding companies that your mother set up." "She was thorough," Callan said quietly. "She was," Dara agreed. "But Dorian's lawyers have been closing in on those layers. They're probably 2-3 weeks away from being able to file a legitimate claim." She looked at Leora. "We need to get there first. We need you to be there, with documentation establishing you as Elena's heir, and we need to access whatever she stored there before his lawyers can get a court order to seal the property." "What's there?" Leora asked. "We don't know exactly. Based on what Callan's been able to piece together over 4 years," she glanced at him. "We think it's financial records, transaction logs, possibly recorded communications, the backbone of whatever case Elena was building when she died. The case against Dorian and against the people he was working with. It's not a small list." Leora looked at the pendant again, the compass arm, north-northwest. "The property," she said. "Where is it?" Dara turned the laptop toward her. On the screen now was a map, satellite view, the particular blue-gray of Lake Michigan visible at one edge, a structure marked at the waterfront, north-northwest. Leora looked at the pendant and then at the map and felt the thing click into place with a physical sensation, like a joint finding its socket. "She pointed me there," she said. "From the time I was 12. She put a compass around my neck and one arm points there." "Elena didn't leave things to chance," Callan said, and his voice had gone rough at the edges in a way it hadn't before. He pressed his hands flat on the table and stood. "We need to move on the property today, before the court order has a chance to—" Marcus came in from the hallway. He was holding his phone, and he had the look of someone carrying information they wished they weren't carrying. "Problem," he said. Callan turned. "Vance's contractors found the hotel suite. They didn't find anyone there, but they found evidence of recent use." Marcus looked at Leora briefly. "And they have a description. Someone on hotel staff." "How much did they pay?" Callan said. "Enough. The description includes the pendant." Leora's hand went to her throat automatically. "They know what to look for," Marcus said. "And Dorian filed a second report this morning, 20 minutes ago. Not a kidnapping report. A report claiming that a minor in his custody has been manipulated by a known criminal into refusing to return to her legal guardian's care. He's framing it as coercion," Dara said, without looking up. "Right. Which gives his private contractors legal cover to detain and return her, pending the court hearing, if they locate her." Leora stood up from the table. "He's issuing a description of me," she said, "with the pendant, to private contractors who now have legal cover to take me." "Yes," Marcus said. "And there's a court hearing today. This afternoon, 2 o'clock. She looked at Callan. "Can we stop it?" "We can file for a continuance. We can challenge the judge's jurisdiction given that you're not a resident of his district. We can—" He stopped. "These are things that buy time, Leora. They're not things that win." "What wins?" "The documents, the records, the case your mother built." He looked at her steadily. "The truth, placed where it can't be buried again." The kitchen was quiet. The rain kept going. The bananas in the bowl had gone darker, and the coffee maker was doing something small and mechanical, and the whole scene had the surreal, overlit quality of a moment that knows it's a turning point. "Take me to the waterfront property," she said. "It could be compromised," Dara said immediately. "If Dorian has any idea what's there, then we get there first." Leora looked at each of them in turn. Marcus with his flat watchfulness, Dara with her precision, Callan with his controlled weight of attention. I'm the one with legal standing to access whatever my mother left there. I'm the one with the compass. And I'm the one he's going to use as a weapon to bury this if I stay in this kitchen and wait for someone else to make a move. A silence. She sounds like Elena, Dara said to no one in particular. Yeah, Callan said. She does. They moved out 40 minutes later. Not immediately, because there were things that needed to happen first. Dara made calls, legal calls, to a name Leora didn't know, establishing a paper trail of Leora's voluntary presence and her explicit statement of non-duress. Callan made other calls that he made in a different room, quietly, with the door closed. Marcus drove a different car around and left it somewhere, and came back, and the vehicle they took to the waterfront was not the same vehicle they'd arrived in. These were the mechanics of living in Callan Rourke's world, Leora was learning. Every move left a shape, and you tried to make the shape deceptive. Every trail you made, you tried to make it lead to the wrong place. Not because you were hiding something criminal, but because you were operating in a space where the wrong people had the right access, and you had to be consistently, exhaustingly ahead of them. She understood it. She didn't like it, but she understood. In the car, heading south toward the lake, Dara sat next to her and opened the laptop on her knees and walked Leora through what she knew about the waterfront property. It was a boathouse structure, old, built in the 20s, renovated twice, currently registered to a holding company called Meridian River Consulting LLC, which was registered to a second company, which traced back to a third company that had Elena Calloway's name on it if you knew how to read the filing language, which most people didn't. Your mother was good, Dara said, not for the first time, with the specific admiration of someone who recognized craft. She taught herself, Leora said, staring at the city moving past. She used to tell me she learned everything important by figuring out how to do it wrong first. Dara made a small sound that might have been a laugh. That tracks. The waterfront was a 20-minute drive in the rain. They took a route that Leora didn't recognize and she didn't ask about because she had stopped trying to maintain the fiction that she was navigating this in any standard way. She was in motion. That was what mattered. They were 6 blocks from the property when Marcus, in the driver's seat, said, without particular alarm, "We've got company." Leora looked through the back window. A black sedan. Not the same kind of black as Callan's vehicles. Less deliberate, more anonymous, keeping pace. His? Callan said. Probably. Picked us up about a mile back. How did they find us? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, the legal filing, Dara's call to the attorney. He glanced in the rear view at Dara. Someone in his circle has access to that channel. Dara's face went tight. That's not possible. That call went through... It went through something that's been compromised, Marcus said, flat, not accusatory. We deal with it later. How far are we from the property? Callan said. 5 minutes. Can we lose them in 5 minutes? No. Then we don't lose them. We get to the property first and we make them irrelevant. Leora was looking at the black sedan in the mirror. It was holding its distance, patient, like something that knew it would get what it wanted and wasn't in a rush. What do they want? She said. They want you in a car going back to Dorian, Callan said. The contractors. They're not going to physically grab you off a street. Too many witnesses. They'll wait for an opportunity. They'll wait until I'm separated. Yes. She looked at the pendant. She thought about the shape of the trap, how elegant it was, in a horrible way. How completely Dorian had built it around her. 7 months, a corrupt judge, a psychiatric evaluation sitting in a file, private contractors with legal cover, and an access to legal communication channels that meant almost any move she made inside the system could be tracked. Her mother had tried to work inside the system. She'd built a case. She'd trusted a good man to hold the evidence. And then she died. We're not going to be able to do this quietly, Leora said. Callan looked at her. Whatever my mother left in that boathouse, Leora said, we can't just take it and work through channels. Dorian controls channels. He controls the judge. He controls whoever is tapping legal communication lines. She was working it through as she spoke, and her voice was faster than usual, not panicked, but pressured, the speed of real thinking. "We have to go public. We have to make whatever is there too visible to bury." "That's a significant escalation," Callan said. "His contractors are following us to the site where my mother hid evidence of his crimes. He filed a report this morning. He has a court hearing this afternoon." She looked at Callan. "What exactly do you think the current level is?" A silence in the car, the rain, the sound of the tires on wet pavement. "She's right," Dara said quietly. Marcus said nothing, which was its own kind of agreement. Callan looked out the window for a long moment. His jaw was tight. She had the sense of him running calculations, risk assessments, contingencies, all the forward modeling of someone who had survived this long by staying ahead of the obvious move. Then he nodded. "Once." "All right," he said. "Public." The boathouse appeared at the end of a service lane that ran along the waterfront, a long, low structure with weathered wood siding and a corrugated metal roof and the look of something that had been left alone for a long time by deliberate choice. The lane was narrow, and the sedan couldn't follow them all the way down without making its intention obvious, so it stopped at the entrance to the lane and sat there, and Leora watched it through the rear window as they pulled up to the boathouse door. Callan got out. Marcus got out. Dara stayed in the car with her laptop. Leora got out into the rain. The lock on the boathouse door was a standard padlock that looked old and was not. Callan looked at it for a moment, and then at Leora. "Your mother would have left a key with the pendant," he said. "Or the pendant itself is the key." Leora looked down at the compass, Rose, the arm that was longer. She turned it in her fingers, looking at the back of it, and saw for the first time, because she had never looked this closely, had never needed to, had never had anyone tell her to, a tiny engraved number along the longer arm's edge. 5 digits. A combination. She looked at the padlock. A combination lock beneath the old casing. Her hands were shaking slightly. She was cold and wet again, and the rain was coming down, and somewhere at the end of the lane, a car full of Dorian Vance's contractors was sitting and watching, and the numbers on the arm of the compass were the 5 digits of a combination that her mother had encoded into a piece of jewelry and put around her 13-year-old daughter's neck, and had died before she could explain any of it. She entered the combination. The lock opened. Inside the boathouse, it was dark and smelled like old water and wood and something chemical and faintly metallic. There was a boat, an old one, covered by a tarp, and shelving along one wall in a workbench, and overhead, the sound of rain on the metal roof was immense, like being inside a drum. Callan found the light switch. A single overhead fixture came on, cold and fluorescent, and everything went flat and overexposed. Marcus went to the shelving immediately. He moved things with quick, methodical hands and then stopped. "Here," he said. Behind the third shelf panel, which was not attached to the wall but to a false backing that swung on a piano hinge, was a metal box. The size of a legal file box, sealed with a second combination lock. Leora crossed to it. Same 5 digits. The box opened. Inside, a hard drive in a protective case. 3 sealed envelopes. A USB drive taped to the inside lid with a note in her mother's handwriting. Small, precise, the handwriting Leora had not seen in 4 years, and that hit her in the chest like a closed fist. For Leora. "When you're ready." She stood there for a moment with the box open and the rain hammering the roof and her mother's handwriting in front of her, and she did not fall apart, though it was close. She breathed. She breathed again. She pressed her knuckles to her mouth and breathed. Then she picked up the hard drive. Callan was at her shoulder. He didn't touch her, didn't say anything. He was just there, which was somehow exactly the right calibration. "Is this enough?" she said. Her voice was rough. "We won't know until we look at it. But this is what she built." "I believe so." She held the hard drive in both hands. Her mother's hands had held this. Her mother had put this here, had built the cipher into the pendant, had planned for Leora to find it when she was ready, and she had not lived to see whether the plan worked. "She trusted me," Leora said. "Yes," Callan said, "with something she couldn't trust anyone else with." "Yes." She put the hard drive into her jacket pocket next to the $11 that were still there, absurdly, still folded in the small interior pocket like they were waiting to be relevant. She picked up the USB drive and the envelopes and put them with it. She closed the box. She turned around. And Dorian Vance was standing in the boathouse doorway. He had come in from the service entrance on the water side, the side she hadn't thought to watch. He was alone, or appeared to be alone. She couldn't see beyond him into the rain. He was wearing a dark coat that was dry at the shoulders in a way that meant he'd had an umbrella until very recently. He was not as large as she always remembered him being. Or maybe she was seeing him differently now, in this light, in this place, after this morning. His eyes went to her jacket pocket, then to her face. And his expression did something complicated and ugly. "Leora, he said. His voice was the voice she remembered, smooth, precise, warm in a way that was a lie so consistent it had become indistinguishable from the real thing. "You've had a frightening experience. I understand that. I want to take you home." She didn't move. "Put down whatever you're carrying," he said, "and come with me. This man has manipulated you. Whatever he's told you. He told me you had Gerald Hartwell killed," she said. The smoothness held, but there was something underneath it that shifted, a tightening around the eyes, a recalculation. "That's an extraordinary accusation," he said. "He told me you have a court hearing at 2 o'clock today based on a psychiatric evaluation that's been backdated and fabricated." Her voice was not shaking. She was astonished that it wasn't shaking. "He told me you've had a corrupt judge on your payroll for 3 years. Leora, He told me my mother found out what you were doing and built a case against you and you had her killed." Her voice cracked on the last word just slightly, and she let it crack because she was done with smoothing things over. "He told me she trusted Gerald Hartwell to hold the evidence until I was old enough to use it." Dorian was very still. "And I am," she said. "I'm old enough, and I have it." She put her hand against her jacket pocket. The hard drive. Something crossed Dorian Vance's face that she had never seen there before. Something stripped of the warmth and the management and the smooth professional control. Something that was older than all of that and uglier. He took a step toward her. Callan moved between them. It was a single, unhurried step, but it was absolute. He put himself between Leora and Dorian with the particular quality of someone who has stood in worse places and is not interested in moving. Dorian stopped. The two men looked at each other in the cold fluorescent light of the boathouse, with the rain hammering the metal roof and the smell of old water around them. And what passed between them was not words, but something older than words. The particular recognition of two people who have been on opposite sides of something for a long time and have finally run out of the luxury of distance. "You're obstructing a legal guardian's access to a minor in his care," Dorian said. Quiet. Controlled. The words of a man who believes in the power of his paperwork. "The court hearing was filed without notice," Callan said. "Your jurisdiction claim is fraudulent. Your psychiatric evaluation is fabricated. And whatever you think you're doing here," he paused, "there are 4 people with recording devices in positions around this building. So whatever you say next, say it carefully." Dorian looked past him at Leora. "You don't know what you're holding," he said to her. "You don't understand what that information touches. People who will not allow it to surface. People far beyond me." "I understand it enough," Leora said. "If this comes out, the full scope of it, there are people whose lives end. Not just mine. People with reach and resources that—" "My mother's life ended," Leora said. "She was 38 years old, and her life ended, and I was 13, and I've been in your house for 3 years watching you and your wife treat me like furniture, and you had my mother killed, and you've been trying to use me to finish what she started so you could bury it." Her voice was fully steady now, all the way steady, in a way it had almost never been in 3 years of living in his house. She looked at him. "I'm not furniture," she said, "and I'm not done." Dorian's face did the final, irreversible thing. He reached inside his coat. Marcus moved, fast, much faster than she'd expected from a man his size, and there was a sharp sound, and Dorian's hand was empty, and Marcus was behind him, and it was over in about 2 seconds. Outside, through the open waterside door, there were headlights, more than 2 cars. And then, beneath the rain, a sound she recognized from every piece of media she'd ever consumed and had never expected to hear in her actual life. Sirens. Real ones. not Dorian's contractors. She looked at Callan. "You called them," she said. "Dara called them," he said, "from the moment we left the townhouse. Whatever happened here today was going to happen with a record." The sirens were closer. The lights were on the water, reflected and fragmented by the rain. Dorian Vance stood with his arm held by Marcus and looked at Leora with an expression that she understood was the look of a man watching the architecture of his life begin to come apart, stone by stone, in real time. It was terrible, and she did not look away from it. "You have no idea," he said, and his voice had finally lost its smoothness, finally cracked through to something rougher underneath. "What you've just started." "Yes, I do," Leora said. And the police came through the boathouse door, and Callan Rourke stepped back, out of the way, out of the frame, because this was not his moment. It had never been his moment. And he stood against the shelving with his arms at his sides and watched the 17-year-old girl who looked like her mother stand in the middle of the light and hold her ground while the world she'd been kept out of finally. The police came through both doors at the same time. That was the thing Leora noticed first. The coordination of it, the way they split the space in one motion, some through the waterfront entrance and some through the lane door, flashlights cutting through the fluorescent overhead like they didn't trust the light that was already there. 4 officers. Then 2 more behind them, and behind those a man in plainclothes who moved differently from the rest. Slower, more deliberate, with the particular quality of someone who arrives after the chaos has peaked and considers that his natural habitat. Marcus released Dorian's arm and stepped back with his hands visible, a practiced motion that communicated exactly what it needed to communicate. Dorian straightened his coat. That was the thing that hit Leora in a way she hadn't anticipated, the speed with which Dorian reassembled himself. In the time it took the plainclothes officer to cross the boathouse floor, Dorian had gone from the cracked, stripped version of himself she'd just seen, the face beneath the face, back to the managed, precise, warm professional. He didn't run. He didn't raise his voice. He stood in the middle of the room, and when the plainclothes officer reached him, he said calmly and clearly, "Detective, thank you for responding. I've been trying to locate my foster daughter for 18 hours. I'm relieved she's safe." Leora stared at him. The detective, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a gray mustache and the eyes of someone who had heard every version of every story, looked at Dorian, then at Leora, then at Callan, then around the room at Marcus and the general arrangement of people and metal boxes and open hidden compartments. "Which one's the foster daughter?" he said. "I am," Leora said. He looked at her. "You okay?" "I'm fine. I came here voluntarily." "She's been manipulated," Dorian started. "Sir." The detective's voice didn't rise, but it had a quality that stopped things. He looked at Dorian for a moment, then back at Leora. "How old are you?" 17. "And this man," he gestured toward Callan, "you know him?" "He picked me up off the side of a road yesterday evening after my foster family drove away without me." She kept her voice level, factual. The way she'd learned to present things in 3 years of navigating the Vances. Stripped of emotion, because emotion was the thing they used against her. "He brought me to a hotel, gave me a room with a locked door, and told me I could call the police at any time." The detective looked at Callan. Callan said nothing, which was the right move, and she recognized it as such. "Detective Harlan," a voice from behind her. Dara, who had come in from somewhere in the last 30 seconds, moving with her laptop under her arm and a printed document in her hand. "My name is Dara Selk. I'm a licensed investigator. Approximately 90 minutes ago, I filed a formal statement on behalf of Leora Calloway, establishing her voluntary presence and her explicit statement of non-duress." She held out the document. "I also filed a request for emergency review of a family court proceeding that was initiated this morning without proper notice to the subject of that proceeding." Harlan took the document without expression. "There's also," Dara continued, "a formal complaint regarding a circuit judge whose impartiality in the matter has been compromised by an undisclosed financial relationship with the petitioner." She nodded toward Dorian. "That complaint was filed at 10:47 this morning with the Court Oversight Office." Something moved across Dorian's face. Fast. Gone. "This is," he started. Sir, Harlan said again, with the same quality as before. The boathouse was very quiet under the rain. Harlan looked at the document for a long moment, then at Leora, then at Dorian. He was the kind of man who had learned to read a room the way you read a weather system, by pressure, by the way things moved, by what the air was doing. Nobody is going anywhere, he said, until I understand what I'm standing in. What followed was the most surreal hour of Leora's life, which was saying something given the competition from the previous 24 hours. The police secured the boathouse. Dorian's contractors, there had been 3 of them, positioned around the exterior, were identified and held for questioning. Dara produced documents. Callan spoke to Harlan in low tones at the far end of the boathouse, while Marcus stood near the shelving and said nothing to anyone. Leora sat on an overturned crate with her jacket pocket pressed against her side, and the rain hammering the metal roof and the cold working back into her fingers, and she watched. She was good at watching. A second detective arrived, then a woman from the court oversight office, which meant Dara's filing had moved faster than expected. Then, at some point, a man Leora didn't recognize who spoke quietly to Callan, and then spoke quietly to Harlan, and then stood off to one side making phone calls with his back turned. She filed him away. Dorian was separated from her physically by about 30 feet and 2 uniformed officers. He was not in handcuffs. He stood with his arms at his sides and his coat straight, and his face in the managed configuration, and every few minutes he looked at Leora with an expression that she couldn't fully read. Not the stripped, cracked expression from before, not the warm professional mask, but something between them, something that might have been calculation. She didn't look away when he looked at her. That was new. At some point, Harlan came back to her. He pulled up a second crate and sat on it, which put them at the same level, which she suspected was deliberate. The property, he said. This structure. You're claiming it as part of your mother's estate? It belongs to Elena Calloway's estate. I'm her surviving heir. You have documentation of that? Dara has documentation. There's also a formal trust established by Gerald Hartwell that names me as beneficiary. The man whose funeral you attended yesterday? Yes. He looked at her for a moment. The box you found. You opened it with a combination from the pendant? Yes. And the contents are… He looked at her jacket pocket. She put her hand over it, a reflex. The contents are my mother's, she said. They may be evidence. They are evidence. That's exactly what they are. Evidence that Dorian Vance committed financial fraud, obstructed investigations into that fraud, and was involved in the circumstances of my mother's death. She held his gaze. I want them treated as evidence. I want them submitted to someone who is not connected to Dorian Vance or his associates. Harlan looked at her for a long time. You're 17, he said. Yes. That's a significant thing to claim. My mother spent years building it. It's in there. She pressed her hand against her jacket pocket. And I would like to give it to someone I can trust to use it correctly. And you think that's me? She looked at him. I don't know yet. But Dara filed the complaint about the judge through the court oversight office, not through standard channels. I think that means she thinks you're someone who can be approached through the oversight office, which means someone vetted you. Something moved in Harlan's face that might have been, under different circumstances, something close to amusement. You're very precise for 17, he said. I've had a precise education, she said. She gave him the hard drive. She gave him the USB drive. She kept the envelopes because they were in her mother's handwriting and they were addressed to her for Leora, for Leora, for Leora. And they were hers in a way that had nothing to do with evidence and everything to do with the fact that her mother was dead, and these were the last words she'd left, and Leora was not ready to surrender them to a process. Harlan didn't push on the envelopes. He looked at them briefly and then at her face, and then he let it go, which she marked as a point in his favor. Dorian Vance was escorted from the boathouse at 1:47 in the afternoon. Not in handcuffs, because there was not yet a charge that could hold him in cuffs, but with an officer on each side and a set of instructions not to leave the city while the court oversight matter was under review. He walked past Leora on the way out. He stopped. The officer stopped with him. He looked at her for a long moment, and his voice when he spoke was very quiet, meant only for her, and what it said was this. You found one thread, Leora. You don't know how many other threads there are, or where they lead, or whose hands are holding them. This isn't over because you found a box." She said nothing. He walked out into the rain. She stood in the boathouse and breathed and told herself that what she was feeling was not fear. She was not entirely successful. The next 3 days were the closest thing to normal she had experienced in years, which was its own kind of disorienting. Callan arranged for her to stay at a second location, a private apartment on the north side, clean and quiet, belonging to someone she never met and didn't ask about. Dara came and went with updates. Marcus was a permanent fixture at the door. The court oversight office issued an emergency stay on the family court proceeding, which meant the 2 o'clock hearing had been suspended indefinitely pending review of the judge's conduct. Leora's status as a minor in Dorian's legal care was in a gray area, not dissolved, but not enforceable while the complaint was under review. She was in a holding pattern. She hated it. She spent the first day reading the 3 envelopes. She sat on the floor of the apartment's small living room with the envelopes in front of her for about an hour before she opened the first one. Not because she was scared of what was inside. She was, but that wasn't the reason. But because once she opened them, the number of unread letters from her mother would go from 3 to 0, and she would never have another. She opened them anyway. The first was practical. Her mother, in her precise small handwriting, explaining the property and the trust and the pendant, explaining the cipher, explaining Hartwell's role. Written in plain language, no codes, because this was not meant for anyone who might intercept it. This was meant for Leora, and it assumed Leora was smart enough to have already found it. The second was the case. A summary, 4 pages, single-spaced, of what Elena had discovered and documented. Names, dates, transaction flows, the structure of the fraud. Dorian Vance was in it prominently. So were others. A name Leora didn't recognize, a name she half recognized from news coverage she hadn't paid particular attention to, and one name that stopped her. She read that name twice. She read the sentences around it 3 times. Then she set the letter down on the floor and sat very still. The third letter was short. 2 paragraphs. Personal. She read it once and folded it back up and put it inside her jacket pocket with the $11 and did not take it out again for a long time. She went to find Callan. He was in the kitchen. They were always in kitchens, she was noticing, as if the most consequential conversations of her life were going to be conducted in rooms designed for eating. He was on his phone, as he frequently was, and he ended the call when she came in and looked at her face, and something shifted in his. "What did you find?" he said. She put the second letter on the table. He read it. He read it without expression, or almost without expression. She was getting better at reading the micro-movements of his face, the small tells that lived beneath the controlled surface. Halfway through, he went very still. At the end, he set the letter down and put both hands flat on the table. "Silas Brandt," she said. "Yes." Silas Brandt was not a name that meant something to Leora in personal terms, but she had read the news coverage around him. The philanthropy, the public presence, the particular kind of civic visibility that wealth combined with public relations could construct. He was on the board of 4 nonprofits. He had given his name to a children's hospital wing. He was, in the public record, the kind of man whose portrait ended up in lobbies. According to her mother's notes, he was also the primary architect of the financial fraud that Dorian Vance had been facilitating, the source of the records that needed to stay buried, and the person who had made the call. Elena's letter was careful here, precise, no direct accusation of specific action, but the implication was drawn in language so careful and so clear that it might as well have been direct, that Elena Calloway needed to stop what she was doing, permanently. She knew, Leora said. Yes. She knew Brandt was behind it, and she documented it, and she hid it, and she... Leora stopped, swallowed. And she's dead. Yes. And Dorian is a mechanism. He's not the center. He's not the top of it. He never was, Callan said. His voice was careful. Dorian is competent and corrupt. Brandt is... He stopped, finding the word. Brandt is the architecture. You knew about Brandt. Callan was quiet for a moment. I suspected, he said. That's not the same thing as telling me. No, it's not. She looked at him. What else haven't you told me? The question sat in the kitchen air between them like something that had weight. Callan looked at it, or looked at her, which was the same thing right now, and she watched him make a decision. Brant knows Harlan, he said. The floor didn't shift. It felt like it should have, but it didn't. How? She said. They've worked adjacent to each other for 15 years. Harlan's not on Brant's payroll, say, I don't believe that. But they have a relationship. Professional, civic, the kind of relationship that means Harlan would make a call before he moved on something that touched Brant's name. He held her gaze. I don't think Harlan looked at what's on that hard drive yet. I think he looked at the first layer and then he made a call. I think that's why the last 24 hours have been quiet. Too quiet, Lior said. Yes. She sat down. She put her hands on the table in front of her and looked at them. The knuckles, the cold reddened skin, the small scar on her right index finger from a kitchen accident in the Vance house 2 years ago that nobody had bothered to take her to get properly cleaned. The hard drive, she said. The evidence is on the hard drive, and we gave it to Harlan. Yes. And Harlan may not be safe. May not be. So the evidence is potentially in the hands of someone who will call Brant before he uses it. Potentially. Which means Brant knows we have it, or will know, or already knows. Callan said nothing. How long do we have, she said, before Brant decides the same thing Dorian decided about my mother? The silence that followed that question was the loudest silence she had ever sat in. Callan's jaw was tight. He was running the numbers she could see him running them, the forward modeling, the contingencies. I made a mistake, he said. She looked at him. I should have made a copy of everything before we handed it to Harlan. I had the resources to do it. I didn't move fast enough. He said it flat, no self-pity in it, just the exact acknowledgement of the exact error. I was trying to do this through legitimate channels because I wanted it to hold up. I wanted a chain of custody that couldn't be challenged. He paused. I may have handed this only copy of your mother's work to a man who will quietly make it disappear. The apartment was very quiet. The rain had stopped at some point in the last hour, and the sudden absence of it made the silence different, harder, more specific. Can we get it back? Leora said. Not through channels. Then not through channels. He looked at her. Dara, she said. Does Dara have any access? Dara is already on it, he said. She's been trying to mirror the hard drive contents remotely since last night. But the drive is in an evidence locker now, and she needs time she may not have. What does she need? The original file architecture, the way Elena organized the drive. If Dara knows the structure, she can work backward from what she's already pulled from the external records. She can reconstruct a significant portion without the drive itself. He paused. But your mother was careful about how she organized things. The structure it's not standard. Leora thought about the cipher in the pendant, the 5-digit combination, the false back panel, the box behind the shelf. Her mother had not been standard about anything. She used a music system, Leora said. Callan looked at her. She loved music, specific music. She organized everything, her whole life. She organized by a music system she invented herself. Her filing at home, her recipe box, the way she arranged books. Leora was pulling this up from somewhere deep, from the archive of childhood observation that she'd been compiling without knowing she was compiling it. She would take a piece of music she knew and use the bar structure or the key sequence, or sometimes just the title, as an organizing logic. It was a mnemonic she'd invented. She said it helped her remember where things were. Callan was very still. What music? He said. I don't know exactly. It changed, but there was one piece she came back to. It was always on when she was working. I'd hear it through the study door, a piano piece. She played a recording of it, and it was... Leora pressed her fingers to her forehead. It was something I would know if I heard it. I can hear it, but I can't name it. Can you describe it? It was slow, deliberate. 3 notes repeating in the bass, and then something more complex above. It felt like it was circling something without landing. She looked up. It felt like patience, like it was made by someone who could wait. Callan stared at her for a long moment. "Come with me," he said. He took her to the living room where there was a small speaker system, and he pulled out his phone and searched for something and played it. The first 3 notes hit her in the sternum. "That," she said. "That's it." Callan looked at his phone screen, then at Dara's number, and he called her, and when she picked up, he said, "Sadi." She used Satai, the gymnopédies, probably the first. A pause. "Use that as the key and see if the directory structure maps." He hung up. Leora stood in the living room with the music coming from the speaker, slow, deliberate, those 3 bass notes circling. And she thought about her mother sitting in the study with this exact sound coming through the door, building something in the dark, trying to finish it before the time ran out. She hadn't finished it, but she'd left enough. That had to be enough. Dara called back in 40 minutes. The call lasted 11 seconds. All she said was, "It maps. I've got the structure. Give me 6 hours." She got it in 4. 4 hours later, at 9 in the evening, Dara walked into the apartment with her laptop and a portable drive, and the particular look of someone who has not slept and does not intend to start anytime soon. "It's not complete," she said, sitting at the table without preamble. "I'm missing 3 sets of transaction records from 2019 that were probably only on the physical drive, but what I have is—" She stopped. She looked at Callan. "It's significant. The Brandt connection is fully documented. The payment flows, the shell companies, the channeling through Dorian's real estate arm, and—" Another stop. "What?" Callan said. "There's a secondary name, someone I wasn't expecting." Dara turned the laptop toward them. "Your mother found a payments trail that runs through a holding entity that connects Brandt to a city council allocation from 2018. The person who authorized that allocation—" Leora looked at the name on the screen. She did not recognize it. She looked at Callan. His face had gone the kind of still that is not calm. "You know who that is?" she said. "Yes." "Tell me." "His name is Warren Greer. He served on city council until 2020. He's currently—" Callan stopped, chose the word. "He currently sits on the oversight committee for the court system in this district." Leora looked at the name on the screen again. The Oversight Committee. The committee to which Dara had filed the complaint about the compromised judge. The committee whose involvement had suspended the family court hearing. The committee whose emergency intervention had looked until this moment like a stroke of luck, like the system working the way it was supposed to work. "He's not protecting me," Leora said. Her voice was flat and strange. "He suspended the hearing to buy time." "To find out what we have," Callan said. "Yes." "So the stay on the hearing is temporary. And now that we've surfaced Brandt's name, now that we've given Harlan the drive," Callan's jaw tightened. "Greer knows exactly what your mother documented. He knows his name is in it. He's going to move to reinstate the hearing through a different judge, a second judge who is also compromised, almost certainly, and he is going to do it fast, before we can get what Dara reconstructed into public hands." The room was very quiet. "How fast?" Leora said. "If I were him," Callan said, "I would have a new judge signing the order by morning." She looked at the clock. It was 9:27 in the evening. Morning was not far. "What happens when the order is signed?" she said. "You become a legal ward under Dorian's care. The waterfront property goes into contested probate. The hard drive sits in an evidence locker connected to a case that will be quietly declassified and archived. The reconstruction Dara did," he looked at Dara, "is inadmissible," Dara said quietly. "Without the original drive and the documented chain of custody, anything I've reconstructed is inadmissible," Leora said. "Yes." She sat with that. Inadmissible. The word had a particular weight. It meant her mother's work. 4 years of it, built in secret, built at personal cost that eventually became the ultimate cost, couldn't be used, couldn't be put in front of a judge, couldn't be entered into a record, couldn't do the work it had been built to do, not without the original drive, not without the chain of custody, not without Harlan. She thought about Dorian's voice in the boathouse. "You found one thread. You don't know how many other threads there are, or where they lead, or whose hands are holding them. She had thought he was trying to frighten her. She had been right that he was trying to frighten her. She had been wrong that the frightening thing wasn't real. "I need to talk to Harlan," she said. "Leora, I know what you're going to say. He may have already made the call to Brandt. He may have already—" "I know." She stood up. "But if he hasn't, if there's any part of him that's actually a detective and not just a connection in someone's network, then he needs to know what's on that drive before someone tells him to make it disappear. He needs to know Greer's name is in it." She looked at Callan. "People do different things when it becomes personal, when it becomes about them and not just about someone else's case." Callan looked at her for a long moment. "Greer's name being in it makes it personal for Harlan," she said. "If Harlan submits that evidence and Brandt and Greer come down, Harlan is either a hero or he's the man who helped them bury it. Those are his two options. Right now, he may not know that. Right now, he may think he's got a third option: make the drive disappear, keep his relationship with Brandt intact, let the girl go back to her foster family." She paused. "I want him to know there's no third option." Dara was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Callan picked up his phone. "I'll arrange the meeting," he said. She met Harlan at 11 o'clock at a diner 6 blocks from the District Police Administration building. She knew the location wasn't accidental. It was close enough to official ground to give Harlan a feeling of security, but public enough that nothing could happen to either of them without witnesses. She came with Callan. Harlan came alone, which was either honesty or theater, and she intended to find out which. He was already there when they arrived, at a booth in the back with a coffee he wasn't drinking. He looked at her when she slid in across from him, and he looked at Callan, who stayed standing, which Harlan noted and said nothing about. "You've looked at the drive," she said. Not a question. Harlan wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "I've had my technical team review it." "What did they find?" He was quiet for a moment. "Significant financial records. Transaction flows through multiple corporate entities. Substantial." "Did they find Silas Brandt's name?" A beat. "Yes," he said. "Did they find Warren Greer's name?" The second beat was longer. She watched his face do something complicated. A series of small recalibrations, like a compass needle adjusting when the magnetic field shifts. "Where?" he said. 2018 City Council allocation. Run through a Brandt holding entity. It's in the records." She kept her voice even. "I'm telling you this because I think you haven't made the call to Brandt yet. I think if you had, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I think you're sitting here because something in that drive made you hesitant, and you're trying to figure out what to do with the hesitation." Harlan looked at his coffee. "You're 17, he said. "You said that before." "I keep saying it because it keeps being relevant. My mother was 38, and she's dead. Age doesn't protect you from any of this." A long silence. "If I submit this evidence formally," Harlan said slowly, "and it holds up, if the chain of custody is clean enough to survive a legal challenge, then Brandt and Greer are looking at serious exposure. That's not a small thing." He paused. "Brandt has a lot of connections. Greer sits on the committee that reviews my division's budget." "I know," she said. "If this goes wrong, if you make the call to Brandt," she said, "and the drive disappears and Greer reinstates my hearing in the morning, and I go back to the Vance house, then in 7 months I turn 18 and I use what Dara reconstructed to go to a journalist. It won't be admissible in court, but it'll be sufficient for a front-page story." She looked at him steadily. "And the first thing that story is going to ask is what happened to the original hard drive. And the first thing it's going to look at is who last had it." Harlan looked at her. "That's a threat," he said. "It's a consequence," she said. "There's a difference." Another silence. The diner moved around them. Coffee cups, low conversation, the sound of a plate being set down on a hard surface. "Your mother built this over 4 years," Harlan said, finally. Not to her exactly. More to the table, or to the question itself. "Yes." She knew what she was building toward. She knew exactly. And she... He stopped. "How did she die?" "The official ruling." "Cardiac event. Undetected heart abnormality." He nodded slowly, like he was confirming something he'd already thought. The 2019 records, he said. The ones your associate says are missing from the reconstruction. They were on the drive. Leora went very still. What was in them? She said. Medical payments. Routing through 2 of Brandt's shell companies to a private clinic in Michigan that no longer exists. Harlan's voice had changed, flatter, more deliberate. The clinic specialized in certain pharmaceutical interventions, the kind that would be very difficult to distinguish from a natural cardiac event in a standard autopsy. The diner kept moving around her, people eating, cups on saucers, a cook saying something behind the counter. All of it continued at its normal pace, and she sat in the middle of it with the information settling through her in layers. They had killed her mother, not abstractly, not as the inevitable consequence of dangerous work. They had paid for it, routed the payment through a shell company, used a clinic that no longer existed. She had known this was the shape of it. She had known since Callan said, "I don't think it was an accident the morning after the rain." But knowing the shape of something and being handed the specific, detailed, financially documented truth of it were not the same experience. They were completely different experiences, and the second one was almost unsurvivable. She pressed both hands flat on the table. She breathed. She did not fall apart. She could not afford to fall apart. She would fall apart later. She made herself a promise of it, a real promise, that she would give herself the full weight of this at some point when it was safe to do so. But not here, not now, not in this booth, with Harlan watching her and everything still in motion. Submit the drive, she said. Her voice was steady. She made it steady. Leora, submit it tonight, before Greer can move, before the morning. She looked at Harlan, and she did not look away. My mother documented the payments that killed her. It's in there. That's not a financial fraud case anymore. That's a murder case, and you know it. And if you help bury it, then you are an accessory to it. She let that land. I don't think that's who you are. I think you're sitting here instead of making a call because that's not who you are. Harlan was quiet for a long time. I need to make some calls, he said finally. Not to Brandt. Different calls. How long? 2 hours? Maybe 3. You have until morning, she said. He looked at her one more time, the measuring look, the pressure reading, and then he left money on the table for the coffee and stood up and walked out. She watched him go. Callan slid into the booth across from her. He'd heard all of it from where he stood. She didn't look at him. The payments, she said. I know. They documented it. My mother documented it. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the diner windows, the city was wet and dark, and the occasional car went past throwing light across the window in long stripes. She knew, Leora said. What? She knew they'd come for her. If she'd gotten far enough in the documentation to find those payments, she knew what it meant. She knew what was coming. She stared at the window. And she still sent me to school that day, made me breakfast, put the pendant around my neck. The pendant that pointed to the boathouse. The pendant that was the key. She had put it around Leora's neck when Leora was 12. 5 years before she died. 5 years. She had been building this for 5 years at least, and she had given her daughter the key when Leora was 12 years old, and she had put her daughter at the center of the escape route, and she had gotten up every morning and made breakfast and sent her child to school. She was the bravest person I've ever known, Leora said, and her voice only broke slightly on the last word. Callan said nothing, but he stayed. At 2 a.m, Harlan called. I've contacted a federal prosecutor I trust, he said without preamble. She's out of Chicago's district, which means Greer has no oversight of her proceedings. I've submitted the drive to her office under emergency review as potential evidence in a federal financial crime and possible homicide investigation. A pause. She's issuing a federal hold on all related evidence, which supersedes the state court proceedings and freezes Greer's ability to reinstate the family court order. Leora sat on the floor of the apartment with her back against the wall. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me. His voice was flat. The 2019 records you mentioned, the medical payments. The prosecutor is going to want to talk to you. I'll talk to her. She'll want everything, all of it. I know. And Leora, he stopped. Whatever your mother built, the way she built it, the routing, the layers, the cipher and the pendant, that's remarkable work. I want you to know that. She pressed her knuckles against her mouth. I'll tell her, she said, to no one. She slept for 3 hours. She woke at 5:30 to her phone buzzing. Dara, a text. Greer tried to refile at 4 a.m. Federal hold blocked it. He knows. She lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about what Dorian had said in the boathouse. This isn't over because you found a box. He was right. It wasn't. Because Greer knew they had his name. And Brant, they still hadn't heard from Brant, which was not the same as Brant not acting. Brant was architecture. Architecture didn't panic. It adjusted. And somewhere in the week ahead, there was a federal prosecutor who needed Leora to sit across from her and testify to things Leora had not yet fully processed and could not afford to fall apart over. And there was the Vance house, which still technically had legal authority over her for 7 more months. And there was Camille Vance, who had been wearing her mother's necklace at the funeral, the one taken from Elena Calloway's belongings after her death, taken by people who had decided that whatever Elena had left behind belonged to them. Leora sat up. She reached into her jacket and found the 3rd letter, the short one, 2 paragraphs. She unfolded it and read it again in the gray pre-dawn light. The first paragraph said, "I'm sorry for every morning I didn't tell you all of it. I wanted you to be a child for as long as possible. I don't know if I made the right choice." The second paragraph said, "You are the only thing I built that I'm certain of. Whatever they tell you about who you are, whatever they try to make you into, this is the truth. You are entirely yourself, and that has always been enough, and it will continue to be enough when I am no longer there to say so." She folded it. She put it back in her pocket. She got up. And that was the moment, the exact moment, not the boathouse, not the rain, not the diner with Harlan, when everything she had been before the convoy stopped, everything the Vance house had made her, every reflex of smallness and silence and disappearance began to fall away. Not gone. Not finished. These things don't finish. But falling. She went to find Callan. She found him in the kitchen. Of course she did. And he was standing at the window with his coffee looking at the city going gray at the edges with the first light. And when she came in, he turned and looked at her face, and something in his expression changed. "We need to talk about the gala," she said. He set his coffee down. "What gala?" he said. "The Brant Foundation Charity Gala. Saturday night. Brant will be there. Greer will be there. Dorian Vance—" She stopped. "I looked it up at 3 in the morning. I couldn't sleep. It's a public event. Ticketed. Press coverage. The kind of room that has cameras from 12 different outlets and an audience that includes every person Brant has constructed his public image in front of." Callan looked at her steadily. "And you want to be there," he said. "I want to be there with everything Dara has reconstructed. I want to be there with my mother's letters. I want to be there when Silas Brant stands at a podium and talks about his philanthropy and his civic commitment, and I want to make sure that the people in that room understand exactly what he's built his public image on top of." She looked at Callan. "The federal case will take time. Federal cases always take time. Time is what Brant uses. Time is how architecture works. It waits things out." She paused. "I don't want to wait." "Going to that gala," Callan said, "makes you a target in a room full of people who have reason to want you quiet." "Yes," she said. "Dorian will be there. Greer may be there. People we don't know yet may be there." "Yes." "You're 17 years old." "You keep saying that," she said, and there was something in her voice that might, under different circumstances, have been almost a smile. "It's still not changing anything." He looked at her for a long moment in the gray early light. Outside, the city was waking up. A bus going past somewhere, a sound of distant traffic. The world resuming its normal operations without any awareness of what had happened in a boathouse on the waterfront the previous afternoon. And then Callan Rourke, who was not a man who smiled easily or often, who had operated in difficult spaces for 2 decades with a controlled, severe precision that left no room for unnecessary expression, did something she hadn't seen him do before. He nodded, once. Slow. "Saturday," he said. "We have 5 days." He picked up his coffee. "We're going to need all of them." She was turning toward the door when her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. No text. Just a photograph. The photograph was of the federal prosecutor's office building, taken from across the street, time-stamped 11 minutes ago. And standing outside it, looking directly at the camera, was a man she didn't recognize. Tall, gray coat. The particular stillness of someone who... The photograph stayed on her screen for 3 seconds before Callan crossed the kitchen and took the phone out of her hand. He looked at it. His face did nothing. That was the tell. When Callan's face did nothing at all, it meant the information was bad enough that the control required was total. "Marcus," he said. Marcus was in the doorway before the second syllable landed. Callan turned the phone toward him. Marcus looked at the photograph for exactly as long as he needed to. Then he was already moving, already on his own phone, already talking to someone in the clipped half-language of people who have rehearsed for exactly this kind of morning. "Who is he?" Leora said. "Don't know yet." "But you have a guess," said Kiyoung. Callan handed her phone back. "Brant moves through intermediaries. He doesn't use the same people twice. Whoever this is, he's not in any file I have." He looked at the timestamp again. 11 minutes ago, which means the message is not that he's watching the federal building. The message is that he wanted us to know he's watching it and that he knew how to reach your phone. Leora looked at the number. Unknown. Untraceable, she assumed. "He's telling us he can get to the prosecutor," she said. "He's telling us he can get to anyone." She set the phone face down on the counter. She thought about Brant, the children's hospital wing, the philanthropy, the lobby portraits, a man who had spent years constructing a public face and was now watching a 17-year-old dismantle it from a kitchen in a North Side apartment and had chosen to respond not with panic, but with a photograph. Deliberate, patient, architectural. "He's not going to move on the prosecutor," she said. Callan looked at her. "Not directly. That's too visible. A federal prosecutor, federal investigation, it's already in the system. If something happens to her, it accelerates everything he's trying to stop." She was thinking it through as she spoke, turning it over. The photograph isn't a threat to her. It's a threat to the case. He's telling us he has surveillance on the building. He's telling us he knows who goes in and who comes out. "He's telling us he'll know if you go in," Callan said. "Yes. The prosecutor needs your testimony. She's going to need you to come in." "I know. And he'll be watching every entrance." "I know." She picked up the phone again and looked at the photograph. The man in the gray coat, looking directly at the camera, patient as architecture. "We go to the gala first, Saturday. We make it public before I walk into that building." She looked at Callan. "If Brant's name is already in the press, if the story is already out, then what I say to the prosecutor is corroboration, not the first move. It's harder to suppress corroboration. The gala is 4 days away. Then we use 4 days." Callan was quiet for a moment. Then, "There's a risk you don't know about." She waited. "The gala? Brant's foundation runs it, which means Brant controls the security, the guest list, the venue layout. If you walk into that room, you walk into his space." "I know." "Last time someone got close to Brant in his own space..." He stopped. "My mother," she said. "Elena wasn't at a public gala, but she had a meeting with someone in Brant's circle. Someone she thought she could trust. His jaw was tight. 3 weeks later, she was dead. The kitchen was very still." "I'm not my mother," Leora said. She worked alone. She worked in secret." She held Callan's gaze. "I'm standing in a room with you and Dara and Marcus and a federal prosecutor and a detective who submitted evidence last night that has Brant's name on it. I am not alone." He looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. "You're not." The 4 days before the gala were the most compressed of her life. Dara worked almost without sleeping, reconstructing and cross-referencing, building a presentation of the financial records that was clear enough for a room full of people who were not forensic accountants. She was meticulous and she was fast, and she consumed coffee with the grim efficiency of someone who had made peace with the fact that her body was a tool she was using hard. Leora sat with her for hours at a time. She learned the structure of her mother's case the way you learn the layout of a building, room by room, corridor by corridor, until you could navigate it in the dark. She asked questions. She pushed on the weak points, the places where the documentation had gaps, the places where the chain was thinner than they needed. Dara answered without condescension, which Leora appreciated with the specific appreciation of someone who had spent 3 years being condescended to. Callan managed the logistics. Tickets to the gala, real tickets, properly purchased, no deception in the entry, were arranged through a name she didn't ask about. Dara's presentation was encrypted and stored on 3 separate drives in 3 separate locations. Contacts were made with 2 journalists, one from a national outlet, one from a local investigative paper, who were sent preliminary information with the promise of more on Saturday night. Both said yes. Of course they said yes. Marcus drove her to a meeting with the federal prosecutor on Thursday morning. They went in through a building 2 blocks from the federal office, through a connecting underground corridor that Leora had not known existed and would not have found on her own. The prosecutor's name was Claire Ibarra. She was 40, Nigerian-American, with the kind of face that held everything it received without leaking any of it back. She looked at Leora across a conference table and said, without preamble, "I've reviewed the drive. I've reviewed the reconstruction your associate provided. I want to hear everything you know, in your own words, beginning with the pendant." Leora talked for 2 hours. She talked about the pendant and the cipher and the boathouse. She talked about Hartwell's funeral and Dorian's behavior and the psychiatric evaluation. She talked about the photograph on her phone and the gray-coated man outside this building. She talked about her mother, carefully, with the specific care of someone who was protecting something irreplaceable, and what she understood about Elena Calloway's work and her death. Ibarra listened without interrupting. She took notes by hand, small and fast and precise. At the end, she put her pen down and looked at Leora and said, "The medical payments documentation, the 2019 records that were on the original drive. We've been able to partially reconstruct them through the shell company filings, the clinic in Michigan." She paused. "We have enough to open a homicide investigation. It won't be fast. It may not result in the outcome you want within any timeline that feels real to you. I want you to know that." "I know," Leora said, "but it will be investigated." "I know." "Your mother's case will be reopened. Her name was Elena Calloway," Leora said, and her voice was even and clear. "She was 38 years old, and she was a mother, and she was the best financial investigator I've ever heard of, and she spent the last years of her life trying to give someone else the chance to do what she couldn't finish. Her name doesn't need you to restore it. It just needs to be said correctly." Ibarra looked at her for a moment. "Elena Calloway," she said exactly. "Yes." Thursday night, Leora couldn't sleep. She lay on the apartment bed and stared at the ceiling and tried to prepare herself for what Saturday was going to be. She went through it in her mind. The room, the crowd, the cameras, Brant at the podium. The thing she was going to have to do, stand up and speak in front of people and not fall apart, and say the true thing loudly enough that it couldn't be covered over. She had not spoken loudly in 3 years. She had not spoken when she should have spoken. She had trained herself out of it through a process so gradual that for a long time she hadn't noticed it was happening, and she was only now beginning to understand the full extent of what the Vances had done to her. Not through violence, not through any single dramatic act, but through the steady, patient architectural pressure of making her smaller and smaller until she occupied almost no space at all. She thought about the man in the gray coat. She thought about Dorian's voice. "You found one thread." She thought about Brant's photograph, the calculated patience of it, the message it was designed to send. She thought about Camille Vance wearing her mother's necklace. She got up at 4 in the morning and sat at the table and wrote down everything she was going to say. Not a script. She couldn't read from a script in that room. She knew that instinctively. She needed to be able to speak from the thing itself rather than from the representation of it. But notes, the shape of it, the order. She worked until the light came. Saturday arrived gray and cold and sharp, the way Chicago November does when it has decided to be serious about itself. The gala was at 7. She spent the afternoon with Dara, running through the presentation one final time, confirming the journalists were positioned, confirming the drives were in place. Callan was on his phone for most of the afternoon in a different room. Marcus drove a route around the venue. The Meridian Arts Center, a converted industrial space in the West Loop that Brant's Foundation had been using for this event for 7 consecutive years, and came back with a floor plan drawn from memory that was more detailed than anything they could have gotten from the venue's website. Leora wore the black dress that Patricia Vance had given her for Hartwell's funeral. It still didn't quite fit. She wore it anyway because it was the only appropriate thing she had, and because wearing something that came from the Vances to the room where she ended them felt, in a way she couldn't entirely articulate, correct. She wore the pendant. She checked the combination lock on the small device Dara had put in her jacket pocket. Not a weapon, nothing like a weapon. A transmitter, small and flat, that would broadcast to Dara's laptop from anywhere in the venue and activate the presentation Dara had prepared on the screens that the venue's own AV system would provide. Once Marcus had spent 40 minutes that afternoon in the AV room making the necessary quiet adjustments. You press it once, Dara had said, and everything goes up on every screen simultaneously. The financial records, the transaction flows, Brandt's name, Greer's name, the shell company structure, the clinic. She had looked at Leora steadily. Once it goes up, it can't come down. The journalists will have it. The federal case will have it. Brandt can cut the power to the building, but he can't cut the power to every phone in the room. One press, Leora had said. One press. The convoy that drove her to the gala was different from the one that had stopped for her on the rain-soaked road outside Hartwell Estate. Smaller. Only 2 vehicles. She sat in the back of the lead car and watched the city go past, and thought about how different the light looked now. Not just the quality of it, but what it meant. The way a city's light means something different when you're moving through it towards something rather than away from it. Callan was beside her. He was wearing a dark suit that she'd never seen before, and the scar on his jaw was the same, and he was watching the city with the same camera-quality attention he brought to everything. If Brandt recognizes you from the guest list, he said, he may move before you have a chance to act. Then we move first. We get inside, we find position, we let the first hour run, the reception, the dinner. His speech is scheduled for 9. That's when. I know. During his speech, if something goes wrong, Callan, she looked at him. Something is going to go wrong. Things always go wrong. We handle it when it does. He was quiet for a moment. You sound like Elena, he said, and his voice had the weight of 4 years in it. Good, she said. The Meridian Art Center was lit from outside with warm amber uplights that turned the old brick into something that looked designed for exactly this kind of event. People moved through the entrance in expensive clothes, with the particular ease of people for whom expensive events are simply where life happens. 2 journalists she'd never met were somewhere in the crowd with their credentials and their phones. Dara was parked 2 blocks away with her laptop and the transmission connection and instructions not to move unless told to. Marcus was inside, had been inside for 2 hours, had walked in with catering staff through an arrangement she hadn't asked about. Leora walked up the steps. The entry was everything she expected. High ceilings, warm light, the sound of a string quartet doing something tasteful and forgettable. Waiters moving through with champagne she wasn't old enough to take. She took a glass of water. She kept her left hand in her jacket pocket, not touching the transmitter yet, just knowing it was there. She was scanning the room before she'd fully cleared the entrance. Dorian Vance was there. Of course he was. He stood near the far windows with a drink and a small cluster of people, and he hadn't seen her yet. He looked exactly as he always looked, composed, warm, the professional face doing its professional work. She looked away from him. Warren Greer was near the bar, shorter than she'd imagined from the name, compact, with white hair cut close, and the kind of vigorous, carefully maintained 60-something that announces itself as intentional. He was talking to 2 men she didn't recognize, and his face had the particular animation of someone who is very comfortable in this room. She filed him, kept moving. Callan materialized at her shoulder without appearing to have moved toward her. Brandt is at the back near the stage, he said quietly. Don't look yet. Let him find the room before you find him. She didn't look. She took a breath and moved through the crowd the way she'd moved through the Vance house for 3 years. Quietly, with purpose, taking up the minimum necessary space. Old habit. But this time the quietness was not fear. This time it was tactical. She found a position near the center of the room with sight lines to the stage, to both exits, and to the screens. 4 of them, large format, currently displaying tasteful photographs of the Brandt Foundation's charitable work. Children's Hospital, community programs. All of it beautiful and carefully curated and sitting on top of something that was going to come apart in about 2 hours. She allowed herself to look at Brant. He was tall, taller than photographs suggested, and silver-haired with the kind of face that belonged on money. Not handsome exactly, but authoritative. The face of a man who had been believed his entire life. He was moving through the room with the organic ease of a host in a space he owned, pausing to shake hands, laughing at something with a hand on someone's arm, existing in public the way people exist in public when public has been their native environment for 40 years. He hadn't looked her way. The first hour ran the way Callan had predicted. Reception, dinner, the particular social machinery of rooms like this, the same conversations cycling through different mouths, money talking to money, the Foundation's director giving brief remarks about the year's accomplishments, a video presentation that played on the 4 screens while Leora sat at a table with Callan and watched and thought about Dara 2 blocks away and the button in her pocket. Dorian saw her at 7:45. She was watching Greer when she felt it. That specific quality of attention that lands on you from across a room, the weight of being recognized by someone who does not want to see you. She turned and found Dorian looking at her from across 3 tables. His drink was still in his hand. His face had done the complicated thing again, the crack beneath the surface. And then he'd closed it back up, and he turned away from her, and she watched him take his phone from his pocket. He was calling someone. She pressed the transmitter once, not for the screens, for the signal. The prearranged signal that meant he's seen me, timeline is moving. Callan's phone buzzed once in his pocket. He didn't take it out. He shifted very slightly in his chair, and she understood that meant Marcus had been notified. Dorian finished his call. He put his phone away. He did not look at her again, which was worse than if he had. 8:45. The room was shifting. The after-dinner movement, people finding standing positions, the string quartet finishing and going quiet. On the stage, a Foundation staffer was making final adjustments to the podium. Brant had disappeared from view for the last 20 minutes, which meant he was backstage. Leora excused herself from the table. She moved through the crowd toward the left side of the room, closer to the stage, closer to the largest of the 4 screens. She was aware of everything, the bodies around her, the temperature of the room, the sound of shoes on the polished concrete floor, the way the light changed as she moved under it. Her heart was doing something loud and sustained, and she breathed through it. She was almost in position when she felt someone take hold of her arm. Not rough, not the grab of aggression, a controlled, firm grip above the elbow that stopped her without creating a scene. She turned. The man holding her arm was not someone she recognized. Medium height, nondescript face, the kind of deliberate forgettability that is itself a professional skill. He was wearing the same dark jacket as the venue security staff. And if you didn't look closely, you would not notice that his lapel pin was the wrong color for venue staff. "Miss," he said pleasantly, quietly, "there's a room available backstage if you'd like to step out of the crowd." Not a question. "I'm fine here," she said. His grip didn't change. "Mr. Brant would like a word." Her pulse spiked so hard she felt it in her jaw. She kept her face exactly still. Brant had known she was here. Dorian's call had not been to someone else. Dorian had called Brant directly. She looked at the stage. The Foundation staffer was still at the podium. She looked at the 4 screens. She looked at the crowd between her and where Callan was standing, and it was too many people, too much distance. She could press the button now. Dara would trigger the presentation. The screens would light up. But Brant wasn't at the podium yet. He hadn't started speaking. There was no audience attention directed at the stage. The room was still in its social configuration, and half the people in it were in side conversations and wouldn't look up for 15 seconds. The journalists were positioned for the speech moment. Early trigger would waste the impact. She did not press the button. She went backstage. The backstage of the Meridian Arts Center was a different building from the front. Industrial, functional, the bones of the performance space visible. Cable runs along the ceiling, road cases stacked against the walls, a catering station nobody was using anymore. The security man released her arm once they were through the stage door and walked 2 steps ahead of her through a corridor that smelled like old wood and stage paint. She kept her hand in her jacket pocket. The room he brought her to was a green room. 2 couches, a mirror with bright lights around it, a table with water and food that hadn't been touched. And Silas Brandt, who was standing with his jacket on and his hands clasped in front of him with the patience of someone who had been waiting the right amount of time. He looked at her. She had prepared herself for this moment in the abstract. She had not adequately prepared for the specific experience of being in a small room with a man who had orchestrated her mother's death and who looked, in person, like someone's reassuring grandfather. "Leora," he said. His voice was warm. Of course it was warm. "I've wanted to speak with you. Please, sit." "I'll stand," she said. Something shifted in his face. The warm held, but underneath it something else adjusted. "You're remarkable," he said, "for your age, for your circumstances. What you've managed in the last several days." He shook his head slightly, an expression of what appeared to be genuine admiration. "Your mother was remarkable too." "Don't," she said. "I respected Elena. I want you to know that. You had her killed." He was quiet for a moment. "Elena made choices that put her in a difficult position," he said carefully. "People around her made decisions that I was not entirely in control of." "That's a lie." "It's a complicated truth." "It's a lie." Her voice was steady and she made it stay steady. "The payments went through your shell company. The clinic was contracted through your holding entity. Your name is in the 2019 records." His expression changed again. Slower this time. The warmth did something more effortful. "Those records," he said, "are in federal custody. And I have significant confidence in my ability to demonstrate that whatever interpretation has been applied to them is—" "The federal prosecutor has them," Leora said, "and Dara's reconstruction. And my testimony, which I gave on Thursday, and there are 2 journalists in your ballroom right now who have been sent preliminary documentation and are waiting for the presentation that's going to go up on your screens in approximately—" She looked at her watch. 15 minutes. The warmth left Brandt's face. Not all at once. It left the way the ocean leaves a beach. Steadily, inevitably, and completely. What was underneath it was what she had expected, and also worse than she had expected, because the thing underneath Silas Brandt's public warmth was not rage, and was not panic, and was not any of the dramatic emotional states that would have been, in their way, manageable. What was underneath it was the same patience, the same architectural steadiness, just directed differently now, toward her, without the warmth as cover. "Turn it off," he said. "I can't. It's already in motion." "You have a device in your pocket. One signal and whatever your associate has prepared goes up." He looked at her without blinking. "Send a different signal. Stop it." "There is no different signal." "Then call her." "My phone won't get signal back here." "Then we wait here until after 9 o'clock and the presentation window passes." "Dara has instructions," Leora said. "If I don't signal confirmation by 8:58, she triggers automatically." 8:54. Brandt looked at her for a long moment. "You planned for this," he said. "For this exact scenario." "My mother planned for it," she said. "She planned for every scenario. She planned for the one where she didn't get to finish, and she planned for the one where someone powerful tried to stop it, and she planned for the one where the person carrying it forward got cornered in a room." "You're bluffing." "Am I?" She held his gaze. "Test it." 8:55. The security man was still in the room behind her, between her and the door. She was aware of exactly where he was, the way she'd been aware of every exit since she walked in. She was also aware that Marcus had been inside this building for 2 hours, and that Callan knew she'd been taken backstage because the pre-signal had told him the timeline moved, and that the corridor they'd come through had a secondary entrance that she'd noted on Marcus's hand-drawn floor plan. Brandt moved toward her, not aggressively, slowly, the movement of someone crossing a room to have a private conversation. But she stepped back and her back hit the edge of the makeup table and there was nowhere further to go, and he was close enough now that she could see the quality of his stillness up close. The way he breathed, slow and controlled, the way a man breathes when he is very practiced at not being afraid of anything. "I am going to give you one opportunity," he said very quietly, "to walk out of this building tonight, to take whatever you've reconstructed, whatever testimony you've given, and understand that federal investigations have a particular way of becoming very complicated very quickly for the people at the center of them." His voice was almost gentle. You are 17 years old. You have your whole life ahead of you. Your mother—" He paused. "Your mother made a different choice. I am offering you the choice she didn't take." Leora looked at him. 8:56. "My mother," she said, "put a compass around my neck when I was 12 years old. She spent 5 years building something in the dark that she knew was going to cost her everything. And then she got up every morning and made me breakfast." Her voice was completely steady. "She didn't take your offer because she already knew you'd offer it. She knew what you were. She documented what you were. And she left it for me." Something happened in Brant's face. "What I have for you," she said, "is not a negotiation. There is nothing you can offer me. There is no version of tonight where you leave this room and those screens don't go up." She reached into her jacket pocket and wrapped her fingers around the transmitter. "The only variable is whether you walk out to your podium and stand there while it happens, or whether you stay in this room and let the room wonder where you went." 8:57. "Marcus," she said, without taking her eyes off Brant. The secondary door opened. Marcus came through it with the quiet, unrushed movement of someone who had been waiting just outside for exactly as long as was necessary. He looked at the security man who looked back at him, and the calculation that passed between them was wordless and fast, and ended with the security man stepping aside. Brant looked at Marcus, then at Leora. For the first time since she'd walked into this room, something moved in his face that was not architectural. Something that was not fear. It was not fear. Men like Brant did not feel fear the way other people feel fear, but the recognition of miscalculation. The specific, terrible recognition of a man who has been playing chess and has just understood that his opponent was not playing chess at all. "You're a child," he said. "Yes," she said. "You keep forgetting that I have nothing to lose." 8:58. She pressed the button. Somewhere on the other side of the wall, on 4 large format screens in a room full of the most publicly visible people Silas Brant had spent 40 years cultivating, something began to happen. She heard it. Not the visual, but the sound of it. The particular quality of a room's noise when it changes, when the ambient social hum shifts into something with a different frequency. Voices dropping, a collective intake. The sound of people reaching for their phones simultaneously, that particular modern rustle. Brant heard it too. He turned toward the wall. It was an involuntary movement, the kind the body makes when something important is happening just beyond what the eyes can reach. And in that single, unguarded moment, he looked like what he was. A man watching the structure of his life develop cracks. She walked past him. Marcus was at the door. She went through it and into the corridor and through the stage door and back into the light. The room had transformed. The 4 screens, which had been running photographs of smiling children and community programs and hospital wings named for generous donors, were now running her mother's work. Transaction flows, shell company structures, payment routing, names in clean sans serif text, large enough to read from across the room. Brant Greer, the clinic in Michigan. The dates, the amounts, the architecture of it, laid out with the precision that Elena Calloway had applied to everything she'd ever built. The string quartet had stopped. Nobody had told them to stop. They had simply, collectively, stopped. Dorian Vance was near the exit. She saw him in the moment he saw her, and she watched his face do the final version of the thing it had been doing for days. The management collapsing, all of it, every layer. And she looked at him steadily, and she did not look away. People were talking. The room noise had gone from ambient to something more urgent. She could hear her mother's name. She could hear Brant's name. She could hear someone saying, "Is this real?" And someone else saying, "Call legal." And someone near her saying, "I need to see this again," while holding their phone up to photograph the screens. She stood in the middle of it. She was cold and her heart was hammering and her hands were shaking inside her jacket pockets where nobody could see them. And she was 17 years old in a dress that didn't quite fit. And the room was coming apart around her in exactly the way she had needed it to come apart. A man she didn't know, tall, dark suit, one of the journalists, she thought, stepped toward her and said, "Are you Leora Calloway?" And she said yes, and he said, I need 5 minutes. And she said, "You have 10. And somewhere behind her she heard Dorian Vance's voice, raised for the first time she'd ever heard, saying something she couldn't make out. And then other voices over that. And then Callan was at her shoulder and he said quietly, close to her ear, "He's trying to leave." She turned. Dorian was moving toward the main exit with the controlled urgency of a man who has made the calculation that retreat is the only remaining option. Two venue security staff moved to intercept him. Real venue security, not Brant's planted people. Because someone, Dara probably, had called the venue's management line 30 seconds after the screens activated with information about the court oversight complaint and the federal investigation and the man at the exit who was named in it. Dorian stopped. He turned. And he looked at Leora across the length of the room, through all the noise and the movement and the screens full of her mother's evidence. And his face was no longer any of the faces she'd known. Not the warm professional, not the cracked open version, not the calculated manager. It was just a man. Just a man who had run out of architecture and was standing in the rubble of it. She walked toward him. She walked through the room, through the people and the noise and the screens and the phone cameras that were pointing at her now, some of them recording, and she walked until she was close enough that she didn't need to raise her voice. "My mother's name was Elena Calloway," she said. "She was 38 years old, and she was brilliant, and you were afraid of her." His jaw was tight. He said nothing. "The federal case is open," she said. "Claire Ibarra is the prosecutor. The records are submitted. The reconstruction is submitted. My testimony is submitted." She looked at him. "There is nowhere for this to go except forward." "You don't know it," he started. "I know everything," she said. "That's the problem." Security reached him. She stepped back. Her hands were still shaking. She pressed them against her sides and breathed and looked up at the screens where her mother's work was still running. The transaction flows, the payment routing, the clean, precise documentation of a woman who had spent 5 years building the truest thing she knew and had trusted her daughter to deliver it. Callan appeared beside her. He said nothing. He stood there the way he'd stood in the boathouse, present, steady, not taking the moment from her. "He's going to try to run," she said quietly. "Not Dorian. Brant. Marcus is on the exits. He has resources we don't know about, channels." "Yes," Callan said, "he does." She looked at the stage. The podium where Brant had been scheduled to speak at 9 o'clock was empty. The room was in motion around her shiatsu, people, phones, the increasing volume of voices, and somewhere in this building, Silas Brant was deciding what to do with the next 60 seconds of his life. "Where is he?" she said. Callan's phone buzzed. He looked at it. His jaw tightened. "He went out the stage entrance," he said. "Chip, 2 minutes ago. Marcus was at the secondary exit. He went through the primary." "How far?" "His car was waiting. He had a driver ready." Callan looked at her. "He planned for this too." She looked at the screens, the evidence running, the journalists with their phones, the federal case already open, the court oversight complaint already filed. Can Ibarra stop him at the border? If she moves fast enough, if she has enough for an emergency hold. He was already on his phone, stepping to one side, making the call. She stood in the middle of the room. The screens kept running. Her mother's work, up on every screen, in front of every phone in a room that was already sending it outward to every place a phone could reach. It was already too late for Brant to bury it. She understood that clearly and completely. The evidence was out. The federal case was moving. His name was in the press before morning. But he was in a car. And the car was moving. And everything her mother had built, everything she had delivered, was complete except for the one piece that she could not deliver from a ballroom. The piece that required a man in a moving car to be... Callan was already moving toward the stage exit when she caught his arm. He stopped, turned. "I'm going," she said. Leora, he's in a car and he has a 40-second head start. And if he gets to wherever he's going, we lose the only piece my mother couldn't document from a distance." She looked at him, and her voice was steady in the way it had been steady all night. Not the steadiness of calm, but the steadiness of someone who has decided. The only testimony that puts Brant at the center and not the perimeter is his own communications. Whatever he's trying to reach right now, we need to be there when he reaches it. Callan looked at her for exactly as long as the situation allowed, which was not long. "Stay close," he said. They went out through the stage entrance into the alley behind the Meridian Arts Center, and the November air hit her like a wall, cold and sharp, and smelling like wet concrete and the particular urban cold of Chicago in the dark. Marcus was already in the alley. He had his phone to his ear and he was listening to something, and when he saw Callan, he shook his head in the way that meant the information was not good. "He went north on Halsted," Marcus said. "My man at the corner lost the car at the intersection. There were two identical vehicles. He went in different directions." "Which one was Brandt?" "Don't know." Callan's jaw tightened. He looked at his phone. He was running something. She could see it in his face, the forward modeling, the variables. "He has a property on the North Shore, 40 minutes without traffic. He also has a charter arrangement at Midway." "Airport is faster," Marcus said. "If he's running, he goes to Midway." "If he's running," Leora said. Both men looked at her. But he's not just running. He was on his phone in that green room before the screens went up. I could hear it when I came back out. He was calling someone. There's something he needs to do before he gets on a plane or gets to the North Shore. She thought about the photograph on her phone. The man in the gray coat outside the federal building, taken 11 minutes after the drive had been submitted. "He's going to the evidence." Callan went very still. "Ibarra's office," he said. "He knows where the drive is. He's had surveillance on the federal building for 3 days. He knows the layout, he knows the staff. He has someone inside, or he has a plan, because Brandt doesn't do anything without a plan." She looked at Callan. "Call Ibarra, right now. Not in 30 seconds. Now." Callan was already dialing. The call connected in 2 rings. She could hear Ibarra's voice on the other end. Crisp, alert, the voice of someone who had not gone home for the evening. "Brandt left the gala," Callan said. "We believe he may be moving toward your location or your evidence chain. Can you verify the drive is secure?" A pause. "Check it physically, right now, while I'm on the phone." Another pause, longer. His face did nothing, which meant the information was very bad. He lowered the phone. "The drive is gone," he said. The alley was very quiet. "When?" she said. "Sometime in the last 40 minutes. The evidence room logged an authorized access under a credentials code that belongs to a clerk who left the office at 5 o'clock. He looked at Marcus. "Someone was in the building before we even got to the gala, before the screens went up." She thought about Brandt in the green room, patient, architectural. He hadn't been waiting for her. He'd already moved. He'd been there in that room because the drive was already gone, and he'd wanted to watch her walk in thinking she had leverage that she didn't have, and he'd offered her the exit because the drive being gone meant he'd already won. Except she had pressed the button before she understood that. She had pressed the button, and the screens had gone up, and the information was already in every phone in that room, and the reconstruction Dara had done was still intact, and her testimony was still in Ibarra's files, and the physical drive being gone was... She forced herself to think through it clearly, not to let the panic close the thinking down. It was a blow, but it was not the finish. The physical drive was one piece. It was the best piece, the cleanest chain of custody, but Ibarra had the reconstruction, had the testimony, had the shell company records pulled independently through the financial system. "Does losing the drive kill the federal case?" she said. Callan spoke quietly to Ibarra for a moment. Then, "It weakens it significantly. The 2019 records, the medical payments, were only on the drive. Without them, the homicide angle becomes much harder to prosecute." Elena Calloway's death, the clinic in Michigan, the pharmaceutical intervention that had been routed through Brandt's shell company and executed with the precision of a man who understood that the right death, in the right circumstances, looked like nothing at all. Without those records, it was still fraud, still significant. But her mother's death stayed in the official record as a cardiac event. Leora turned and looked at the street at the end of the alley. The city was still moving, indifferent, wet and lit, and full of its own momentum. "Where is he going?" she said, not quite to either of them. "Leora, think about it. He has the drive. He has what he came for. A man like Brandt doesn't run unless the running is controlled, unless he's going somewhere specific with something specific." She looked at Callan. "He's not going to the airport. He's not going to the North Shore house. Both of those are known. Both of those are places Ibarra can reach." She pressed her hands against her sides. He's going somewhere between. Somewhere that gives him time to decide. He needs 30 minutes of safe ground to make the calls that reshape what happened tonight into something he can survive. Marcus said quietly, the Hartwell estate. Both Leora and Callan looked at him. It was inventoried after Gerald Hartwell died. The estate is in probate. It's technically under court administration, which means it's in a legal gray zone. No owner, no occupant, minimal security. Brant knew Hartwell. He'd have been to that property before. Marcus looked at Callan. It's 23 miles out, 40 minutes. Far enough from the city that whatever he does there stays quiet. The Hartwell estate, where Leora had stood in the rain 8 days ago with a soaked bag and $11 and watched the taillights disappear. If we're wrong, Callan said, we lose him. We're not wrong, Marcus said, and said it with the flatness of a man who has been reading situations for 18 years and has learned to trust the reading. Callan looked at Leora. She looked back at him. Let's go, she said. They drove fast. Not reckless, not the speed of panic, but the sustained upper edge of what the roads allowed. Marcus in front, one of his men in a second vehicle behind, Callan beside her in the back. She sat with her hands in her lap and felt the city giving way to the suburban sprawl and then to the county road with the old oaks on either side, stripped of their leaves, the headlights pulling shapes out of the dark. She thought about the last time she'd been on this road. Walking. Wet. Cold. $11. 8 days. She thought about how much a person could change in 8 days, and whether change was even the right word for it, and decided it wasn't. She hadn't changed. She'd been excavated, layer by layer. The compliance, the smallness, the trained reflexes of a girl who had learned to survive by becoming invisible, until what was left was something she recognized as more fundamental, more original, more truly her own. Her mother's daughter. She reached up and touched the pendant. 42 minutes after leaving the Meridian Arts Center alley, Marcus turned off the county road onto the long gravel drive of the Hartwell estate. He killed the headlights before the turn. The second vehicle did the same. They went up the drive in the dark with only the ambient light of the November sky, which was doing something between overcast and clear, a moving edge of cloud that let the light through in intervals. The estate house was dark. Almost. There was a light in the study window, small, warm, the light of a lamp rather than an overhead fixture. Marcus stopped the car 200 meters from the house, and they got out into the silence. No rain tonight. The gravel cold under her shoes, her breath making small clouds, the sound of the wind in the stripped oaks. Marcus signaled to his man with a gesture she couldn't fully read in the dark, and the second man went wide to the left, moving through the grounds without a sound. He's in there, she said quietly. Appears to be, Callan said. Alone. The drive was taken by someone inside the federal building. That person may have brought it to him, or Brant retrieved it himself. Either way, he looked at the house. He won't have a full team. This was improvised. He put pieces in place in advance, but the execution tonight was faster than he planned. Because I pressed the button before he expected. Yes. She looked at the study window, the small, warm light. A man in there, she thought, making calls, deciding what the shape of his life looked like from this point forward, deciding which version of the next 10 years was still available to him, deciding whether the drive in his hands was enough. I want to talk to him, she said. Absolutely not. He has the 2019 records, the only existing copy. If he destroys them or takes them somewhere we can't follow, Leora, Callan's voice was firm in the dark. This is not the gala. This is a man alone in a building who knows the case against him just went public. The variable he's managing right now is what he's willing to do to change the outcome. I know that. Do you understand what that means? It means he's dangerous. She looked at Callan. He's been dangerous since before I was born. He was dangerous to my mother, and she went into it anyway because the thing she was trying to do was more important than the danger. She paused. I'm not my mother. I'm not going to end up the way she ended up, but I'm also not standing in this driveway while the last piece of what she built disappears into whatever Brant decides to do with it. Callan was quiet for a long moment. The wind moved through the oaks. 5 minutes, he said. I'm in the room. Marcus is outside this window. You say what you need to say, and then it's done. She nodded. They went to the house through the side entrance, a utility door that Marcus's man had quietly opened, the estate's security being as minimal as Marcus had predicted. The interior was cold and dark, and smelled like the particular emptiness of a house that had been occupied and then wasn't. Furniture draped and surfaces bare, and the accumulated silence of rooms waiting for instructions they weren't going to receive. The study door was closed. Light at the threshold. She opened it. Brant was sitting behind the desk. He had his jacket off, draped over the back of the chair, and his sleeves rolled to the elbows in a way she'd never have expected. The deliberate fastidiousness of his public presentation stripped away by the practicalities of whatever he'd been doing. There was a laptop open on the desk, and the hard drive connected to it, and a phone beside his left hand, and a glass of something amber that he hadn't touched. He looked up when she came in. He looked at her, then at Callan behind her, and the calculation was immediate and complete. "You found me faster than I expected," he said. His voice was the same. Even now, in a cold study in an estate that didn't belong to him, with whatever he'd been constructing on the laptop screen, even now his voice had that quality of a man for whom control is the native state, not an effort. "The estate was Marcus's idea," she said. He looked at Marcus, standing in the doorway. "He's good," Brant said, with what sounded like genuine acknowledgement. "Stop," she said. He looked at her. "Stop being like this." Her voice was not angry. It was something more exhausted than angry. "Stop the management of it, the warmth, the admiration. I watched you do it in the green room, and I've watched you do it all night, and I'm done watching it. There's nobody here for it to work on." Brant was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, something in his face did what she'd asked. It didn't disappear. It was too fundamental a part of him to disappear, but it stepped back. And what was underneath it, in the lamplight of the Hartwell Estate study at midnight on a Saturday in November, was something she hadn't seen in him before. Tired. He was tired. Not the tiredness of a single bad night, but the tiredness of a long, sustained effort finally arriving at a point where it could be acknowledged. "What do you want?" he said. Flat, without the performance. "The 2019 records," she said. "Give them to Ibarra. If I give those records to a federal prosecutor, I spend the rest of my life in a room that costs me everything I've built." "Yes." "You understand that you're asking me to..." "I understand exactly what I'm asking you." She moved to the chair across the desk and sat in it and looked at him across the surface of the desk. The way she had sat across from Harlan in the diner, the way she had sat across from Ibarra in the federal office. She was getting, she thought, very practiced at sitting across from powerful men and asking them to do things that cost them everything. "I'm asking you to give a federal prosecutor evidence of crimes that include the arranged death of my mother. I know what that costs you. I'm asking anyway." He looked at her for a long time. Outside the window, she couldn't see Marcus, but she knew he was there. "Your mother," Brant said, and stopped. "Don't." "I need to say something, and I need you to let me say it." She waited. "Elena Calloway came to me," he said. "In 2019, before she was dead. She came to me directly. Not through Dorian, not through an intermediary. She sat across from me, the way you're sitting now, and she laid out what she had, what she'd found." He looked at his hands on the desk. "She gave me the same choice you're giving me. She said, cooperate with an investigation or face the evidence she'd built." His jaw tightened. "I told her I needed time to consider. She gave me a week." "She trusted you," Leora said. Her voice was very quiet. She trusted that self-preservation would override everything else. He looked up. She wasn't wrong about that as a principle. She was wrong about me specifically. The study was very still. "Why?" Leora said. "Because I had been operating for 30 years on the understanding that the structure I'd built was impermeable," he said. "Every time something threatened it, I adjusted. I managed. I brought things back into alignment." He looked at her. "When Elena came to me, I didn't see the choice she was offering. I saw a threat to the structure, and I responded the way I always responded." "You had her killed." "People in my employ made decisions that I..." "No." Her voice cut it. "No. Not that. Not here. Not now. You don't get that language here. She looked at him across the desk, and she didn't raise her voice, and she didn't look away. She gave you a week, and at the end of that week, she was dead. You know what you did. I know what you did. The 2019 records know what you did. She paused. Say it correctly. A long silence. The longest silence she had sat in. Silas Brandt, who had built 40 years of civic architecture, who had put his name on a hospital wing and sat on the boards of 4 nonprofits, and moved through public life as a man of warmth and generosity and impeccable reputation, sat behind the desk of a dead man's study and looked at a 17-year-old girl and said, in a voice that was not quite steady, I arranged for Elena Calloway to be killed. The words fell into the room. She had known them. She had known them in her body for months, known them as suspicion, and then as probability, and then as Ibarra's careful near confirmation. But hearing them from him, said simply and completely, was a different physical experience. It went through her chest and her throat, and it did not break her, and it did not destroy her, and she was not, at the end of it, the same. She reached into her jacket pocket. She set her phone on the desk between them, face up. The recording application was running. It had been running since she'd walked through the study door. Brandt looked at it. He looked at it for a long time. Then he reached for the hard drive. She tensed. Her whole body tensed, the reflex of it, her hand going to the edge of the desk. And he saw it, and he shook his head slightly. He disconnected the drive from the laptop. He picked it up. He held it in his hand for a moment the way you hold something you're assessing. A weight, a measure. Then he set it on the desk between them, next to her phone. Call Ibarra, he said. She looked at him. Call her now. I want it submitted tonight. He leaned back in the chair. I'm not going to destroy it. I understand now why that's not... why it wouldn't... He stopped. He looked at his hands. I'm 63 years old. I've been building things my entire life. Things I was certain were permanent. He was quiet for a moment. Your mother was 38, and she knew they weren't permanent. She knew exactly how temporary everything is, and she built her case anyway. He looked up at Leora. She was right, and I was wrong. It's taken me until tonight to... He stopped again. Call Ibarra. Leora picked up her phone. She ended the recording. She called Ibarra. It took 40 minutes for the federal agents to arrive at the Hartwell estate. 40 minutes in which Brandt did not attempt to leave, did not attempt to destroy anything, did not attempt to manage or adjust or bring things back into alignment. He sat in the chair behind the desk, and he was quiet in a way that was different from all his previous silences, so not architectural, not strategic, just quiet. At some point he said, without looking at her, the shelter. She looked at him. The waterfront property. I heard you had plans for it. He still wasn't looking at her. I want you to know I won't contest it. Whatever the estate proceedings determine, I'll make sure my legal team doesn't touch it. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say anything. When the federal agents came through the door, Brandt stood. He straightened his jacket with the same precise movement she'd seen him use all evening, and he was, in that moment, the most human she had ever seen him. Not because he was breaking down, not because the architecture had fully collapsed, but because the gesture was so habitual, so utterly committed to a presentation that had no audience left, that it was simply the truth of who he was stripped of everything else. A man who straightened his jacket. They took him out. She stood in the study for a moment after. Callan was in the doorway. Marcus was back inside. The estate was full of people now. Federal agents, Ibarra's assistant on the phone relaying instructions, someone with evidence bags for the laptop and the drive. She picked up the hard drive from the desk. She held it for a moment. Her mother had touched this. The shape of it in her hands was the shape of something that had cost everything and had not, in the end, been wasted. She gave it to the agent who came to collect it. Then she walked out of the study, through the cold, dark house, and out the side entrance into the November night. The weeks that followed were not cinematic. That was the thing she hadn't been prepared for. How ordinary the aftermath was. How bureaucratic and slow and full of forms and waiting rooms and attorneys and phone calls that were returned 3 days late. How the resolution of something enormous looked from inside it like a series of very small steps in a corridor with no visible end. The court oversight investigation moved quickly by the standards of court oversight investigations. which meant it took 3 weeks to formally remove the compromised judge and vacate the family court order. Leora received formal notification of the vacatur on a Tuesday morning by email, sitting at the kitchen table of a new apartment, her own, assisted by a legal instrument Ibarra's office helped expedite, establishing her as an emancipated minor on the grounds of the documented abuse and abandonment. She read the email twice. Then she made coffee and sat with it and looked out the window at the street below, which was ordinary and cold and full of people going to work. She was not in the Vance house. She was not in a penthouse suite or a safe house or the back of a black car. She was in a small apartment on the north side of Chicago with secondhand furniture and a window that let in a draft and a lease that had her name on it and nobody else's. She sat with her coffee and felt the specific, unglamorous enormity of that. Patricia and Dorian Vance were indicted 6 weeks after the gala. Dorian on charges of financial fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy, the last charge carrying the weight of the federal case against Brandt. Patricia on 2 counts of fraud and 1 count of filing false legal documentation, the psychiatric evaluation that had been sitting in a file waiting for the right moment. Camille Vance called Leora once. She almost didn't answer. She sat looking at the name on her screen for 4 rings, the name that had meant 3 years of being unseen in the same house, of being treated as furniture, of watching someone wear her mother's jewelry like it was decoration they'd found. She answered. Camille said, "I didn't know." She said it without preamble. She said it the way you say something you've been holding for 3 weeks and have finally accepted that the only place to put it is forward, into the air, toward the person it needs to reach. Leora was quiet for a moment. "The necklace," she said. "My mother's necklace." A pause. "I'll send it. I should have..." A stop. "I'll send it today." "Not the pendant," Leora said. "I have the pendant. The other one. The one you were wearing at the funeral." Another silence. "Yes," Camille said. "I'm sorry." It arrived 2 days later in a small padded envelope with no note. Leora held it in her palm, a thin gold chain with a small oval locket that she had not seen since she was 13, that she had forgotten her mother owned until she saw it around Camille's neck at a funeral, and the forgetting had been its own small grief that she hadn't identified until now. She opened the locket. Inside was a photograph so small she had to hold it close to the light. Her mother and Leora. Leora maybe 7 or 8 years old, both of them squinting into sun that came from the left side of the frame, both of them in the middle of something that was not quite a smile but was moving toward one. She sat with it for a long time. She did not call Camille back. She didn't think Camille expected her to. Silas Brandt did not go peacefully into the federal case. That had never been likely, and she had never expected it. He had lawyers, an army of them, the best money had ever assembled, and the case was complex and the defense was aggressive, and Ibarra had warned her from the beginning that this was measured in years, not months. Brandt pleaded not guilty to all charges. He was released on a bond that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, and he retired to a private property and gave no public statements. His name came off the hospital wing. The hospital board sent a press release that used the word reassessment 4 times in 3 paragraphs. Leora read it and thought about architecture and how long it takes to dismantle something that has been built slowly and carefully over 40 years. Longer than she would like. But it was moving. Warren Greer resigned from the court oversight committee 2 days after Brandt's arraignment, citing health reasons. Nobody publicly disputed the stated reason. Ibarra's office had a separate proceeding in motion that would eventually result in Greer facing his own set of charges. But that was a different corridor with its own slow, bureaucratic steps. Harlan called her once, 6 weeks after the gala. "The homicide investigation is open," he said without preamble. "Elena Calloway's death has been reclassified as suspicious pending investigation. I want you to know that." "Thank you," she said. A pause. "It might not result in a charge. The clinic is gone. The personnel are dispersed. Brandt's lawyers are..." He stopped. "It's an open investigation. That's what I can tell you." "It's enough," she said. "For now." Another pause. "You're a remarkable person," he said, and it came out rough and a little awkward, the way compliments come out of people who aren't used to giving them, because they've spent their professional lives in spaces where compliments are a form of currency and therefore suspect. So was my mother, she said. She had one more conversation with Callan. It was at the waterfront property, the boathouse, now in the early stages of renovation, the structural assessment completed and the plans filed with the city and the first crew 2 weeks out from starting work. She stood inside it on a gray December afternoon with the smell of the lake coming through the open loading door and the memory of rain on the metal roof still very present, even though the afternoon was dry. Callan stood with his hands in his coat pockets and looked at the space. "What are you going to call it?" he said. "I haven't decided. Something without my name in it." She looked at the high ceiling, the structure of the old beams. "My mother built things for other people. I want the shelter to be for other people." He was quiet for a moment. "I owe you an apology," he said. She looked at him. "I knew more about Brant than I told you, early on. I moved cautiously because I was protecting my own operation, my own exposure. If I had moved faster, if I had been more forthcoming—" He stopped. Elena might have had more support. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about what to do with this, where to put it, what it cost, what giving it back to him would do. She had been thinking about forgiveness in the abstract for weeks, in the way you think about a concept that has arrived before you're ready for it, that keeps presenting itself without being invited. She trusted her own judgment, Leora said. She always did. Even when she was wrong, it was her call. She paused. "I don't think you could have changed what she decided to do. She knew who Brant was. She went forward anyway. That doesn't absolve—" I know it doesn't." She looked at the beams. "But it's true. Both things are true." Callan was quiet. "Are you going to be all right?" he said, finally, and the question came out different from all his previous questions. Stripped of the operational, stripped of the forward modeling, just the question itself. She thought about it seriously. She thought about the apartment with the drafty window and her name on the lease. She thought about the court dates and the legal proceedings and the open homicide investigation and the years of bureaucratic slow motion that were ahead of her. She thought about being 17 in a world that was going to keep testing whether she was built to stay in it. She thought about the shelter and the girls it was going to hold and what she was going to do for the next 7 months until she was 18 and the full legal weight of her adulthood kicked in and the things she could do expanded. "Eventually," she said. Callan looked at her. "I think eventually I'm going to be all right," she said. "Right now I'm just here." He nodded. Once. Slow. In the way she had learned to read as his version of agreement, acceptance, the acknowledgement that something had been said correctly. "That's enough," he said. He left her there in the boathouse with the lake smell and the gray December light coming through the open door, and she stood in the middle of the space and turned slowly, taking in what it was going to be, what her mother had left her the means to make it, and she let herself feel the full weight of it without trying to manage it or compress it or make it smaller. Her mother had stood here, had put things in the box behind the false panel, had locked the combination and walked out and gotten in a car and driven back to Oak Park and made dinner for a daughter she was going to go on protecting with every tool she had for as long as she had left. 3 weeks, as it turned out. But the box had stayed. She pressed her back against the old wood wall and slid down it until she was sitting on the concrete floor, and she put her hands over her face, and she did what she had promised herself in the diner with Harlan she would do when it was finally safe. She let it come. All of it. The rain on the road and the taillights and 3 years in the Vance house and the green room and Brant saying it out loud and the locket with the photograph of a 7-year-old squinting into sun. She let it come, and she stayed with it, and she did not perform it for anyone, and she did not compress it, and she did not manage it. When it passed, and it passed slowly, the way these things pass when you finally stop trying to outrun them, she sat on the concrete floor of her mother's boathouse and looked at the ceiling. Then she stood up. On opening night of the shelter, a Saturday in March, the first weekend the weather had been genuinely kind, late afternoon light coming off the lake in a way that made the water look silver, and the renovated boathouse looked like something that had always been meant for this. She stood at the entrance and watched people arrive. Not powerful people. Not Callan's world or Ibarra's world or the world of anyone who had moved through the preceding months in black cars with strategic timing. Caseworkers, a legal aid organization that had agreed to run intake sessions on Tuesday evenings. Two women from a Chicago arts nonprofit who were going to run a weekly drawing class. A retired teacher Dara had found through a network that Leora still didn't fully understand. And girls, the first six, referred through the caseworker channels, age 14 to 19, arriving with the particular quality of people who have been in difficult places and have not yet decided whether the new place can be trusted. She understood that quality. She had carried it herself. She didn't make a speech. There was no podium, no microphone, no formal moment of symbolic weight. She had decided early that the shelter would be a place without speeches, without the performance of rescue, without anyone standing at a podium to talk about the generosity that had made this possible. The generosity was a box behind a false panel and a 5-digit combination, and a woman who had gotten up every morning and made breakfast for a child she was teaching, slowly and carefully, to find her own way home. She moved through the evening talking to people, listening mostly. She listened the way she'd learned to listen, fully, without the performance of listening, without the half-attention of someone waiting to speak. Dara was there for part of it, leaning against a wall near the kitchen area with her coffee and the particular dry observational quality that was her version of warmth. "It looks like something," Dara said. "It looks like a start," Leora said. "That's the same thing." She supposed it was. Marcus appeared at some point in the evening, briefly, at the edge of things, not coming fully inside. He looked at her through the open door and nodded once. She nodded back. He left. She thought about Callan. He hadn't come, and she hadn't expected him to. She had sent him the opening date and time, and he had sent back 3 words. Elena would approve. She had read it sitting at the kitchen table in her apartment in the early morning, and she had not responded for a long time. And when she did, she had written only, "I know, thank you." The evening moved through itself. The light off the lake changed from silver to gold to the particular deep blue of Chicago March dusk. Someone had set up small lights along the interior of the boathouse, and they came on automatically when the outdoor light dropped and the space transformed, from a renovation into something warmer, something that had the quality of intention. At some point, she found herself standing outside, at the entrance, watching the light on the water. The lake was doing what the lake does, enormous and cold and indifferent in the way that large bodies of water are indifferent, not cruelly but simply as a fact of scale. She stood at the edge of the dock and looked at it. She reached up and touched the pendant. The compass rose. The arm that was longer, that had pointed her here. She thought about her mother's handwriting. "You are entirely yourself, and that has always been enough, and it will continue to be enough when I am no longer there to say so." She was standing here. Her mother was not. The gap between those two facts was not one she would ever fully close, and she had stopped trying to think of closing it as the goal. The goal was not the absence of the gap. The goal was learning to live alongside it, to carry it not as damage, but as dimension, as the specific depth that comes from having loved someone you lost and done something, in the end, with the thing they left behind. She was 18 in 4 months. In 4 months, she would be an adult in every legal sense, would have full control of the waterfront property, would be able to make decisions about the shelter's structure and funding without navigating the maze of emancipated minor status. The federal case would still be moving. Ibarra's team would still be building. The homicide investigation would still be open. None of it would be finished, but the shelter would be here. And the 6 girls inside would be here. And the caseworker would be running intake on Tuesday evenings, and the artist would be running drawing classes on Thursdays, and the retired teacher had already asked if she could start a reading group in April. It would grow. It would face problems she couldn't predict. It would require things from her that she didn't yet know she had. It would be difficult in the particular ongoing way that things built for people are difficult. Not dramatically, not cinematically, but persistently, with no clean resolution and no final moment where you could say, done, finished, safe now. She thought about what Callan had said to her the day after the rain in the hotel suite. Protection, distance, or a new beginning. She had chosen something he hadn't quite named, something that was none of the 3 options cleanly, that was its own 4th thing. She had chosen to stay in the difficulty. Not because it was noble, not because she had decided to be someone who stayed in difficult things as a character trait, but because the shelter existed and the girls existed and her mother's work had pointed here, and the only thing that made any of it mean something was to continue showing up for it. Behind her, through the open boathouse door, she could hear voices, talking, a little laughter, the sound of people starting the careful process of deciding whether a new place was safe. She had been in that process herself. She knew what it felt like, from the inside, to be in a room and be slowly deciding whether you could breathe in it. She turned away from the lake. She went back inside. The light was warm. The voices were ongoing. Someone had put music on, something low and instrumental she didn't immediately recognize. And the old beams of the boathouse caught the sound and held it the way good spaces hold sound, without swallowing it. She stood in the threshold for a moment and looked at what her mother had left her the means to build. Then she stepped inside, out of the cold, and let the door close softly behind her. Outside, the lake went on doing what it had always done. Indifferent, silver, enormous, moving under a sky that had finally decided to clear. The lights of the city reflected off the water in long broken lines. The boathouse windows were lit from within against the dark. The rain that had been falling for 8 days was gone, and Leora Calloway stood in the warm light of the thing she had built, dry and steady and unafraid, and the past was exactly what it was, behind her.